The servants informed him that they had brought her. The master ordered her to be brought closer. As the saying goes, every cloud has a silver lining. The servant said that when she approached His Majesty, she should kneel and press her forehead to the floor. That's how her troubles began. Who knew death would be involved? One day, 3 months ago, a plague broke out, and all people were forbidden to go outside. In the 21st century, they were forbidden to contact others. One day, she went out to the store for food and was hit by a car. It was the worst-case scenario that could have happened if you ignored a text message advising you not to go outside. People should never ignore emergency messages. The place where she first opened her eyes when she thought she was dead. She found herself inside a well and couldn't understand how she could have gotten stuck there. She immediately started begging for help, but there was no one there. So she thought about how remote she was, how no one could hear her. It seemed like there was no one else here. And then she saw a light in front of her was a crowd of strange people. She was very scared and started screaming. People didn't understand where she was from and assumed she was a spy. That's how she climbed out of the well. People noticed that he couldn't even speak properly. The girl didn't understand what it was, because she was not in her own body. She thought that she was sleeping, and everyone thought that she was crazy because she hit herself. The man asked if she remembered how she got into the well, or if she remembered her name. And I made sure that this is not what she thinks about people from the village in such strange clothes. Even though she's hearing this language for the first time, she can understand everything correctly. Perhaps God took pity on her and gave her a chance. Then she decided to give herself a cool name for her new life, and said that her name was Elenfila Rose de Mortia Irina. She didn't even know what name could be more suitable for this fantasy world. The man thought she had hit her head. That's how she became Liffy. The villagers said that an evil man hit her on the head and threw her into a well. Or there is another option that she was first thrown into the well, and then she hit her head. But all hypotheses lead to the fact that she damaged her head because she only remembers her name. She was very happy that she had started a new life, but she had nothing to do in the village. But one day she came across a very interesting story. They say that His Majesty Emperor Persilian often sees the princess. It seems he is planning a wedding for himself. The other man thought he was talking about Princess Regina, and when she heard their name, she immediately began asking to be told about it too. These two are characters from her favorite novel, the elegant but stubborn Princess Cyril von Regina, and Persilian Eckhart is known as a bloody tyrant, a veteran emperor who was kind and gentle towards the assimilation of a probable woman. These two were truly a fantastic couple made by heaven itself, and to be precise, they were a fantastic couple only in her imagination. To begin with, Persilian was my main character, not even a supporting one. The girl really wanted them to love each other. She just liked this couple and their storyline. She is very glad that it got into her favorite novel. Since she knew what she could do now, she asked them all to line up. If they want to hear a fortune, she can help them. This way, she can earn money. She can predict the future because she knows what the book was about. Because she remembered all the events in the book, she became a fortune teller. She sees her rich future because money is the best thing that can happen. That's how rumors about the fortune teller Liffy spread very quickly, and before she conquered an entire empire, she was dragged to the emperor. The emperor ordered her to state her name. The girl said she was Elenfila Rose de Mortia, Irina Otbor, Margarita, and then she said she was just Liffy. And on the street, she was a fortune teller, so the emperor asked if she knew what she was guilty of. The girl began to say that she would never again make predictions about the imperial family or about the princess. But without these three, she will have nothing to predict. Now is not the time to think about it. Her life is at stake. She seems to have a wealth of information. The girl heard a child's voice and a half-voice, that there was someone else there besides the emperor and the knights. She raised her head and said she knew quite a lot of things. She didn't understand what was happening. And then the curtain opened in front of her. This noble golden hair and beautiful bright red eyes like rose petals drowning in blood. A tyrant who is tragically known throughout the continent by the name of Persilian de Eckhart. She didn't understand why she was so small. The boy ordered her to tell him when he could return to his normal state. She remembers that in the second part of the novel, the emperor disappeared somewhere. Now she understands why he disappeared. He thought that it happened because of this, that he was not the main character and was simply an unimportant character. She couldn't understand how he could have turned into a child. The emperor remarked that she seemed unaware, so he ordered her killed. The girl shouted that it was not necessary because she would immediately find out how to get rid of his curse and asked to give her a little time. He showed 5 with his hand and she thought, is that 5 weeks or 5 days? Well, when he removed one finger, she realized that it was 5 seconds and asked him to stop. The girl didn't understand what to do because she hadn't even earned any money and couldn't die like that. The girl shouted that he should be with her, and the emperor understood right away. Now she can't see where the spell came from, but she will find out what kind of curse it is. All she managed to find out was that if they were together, she could help. He had no idea how she'd learned of the curse. It seemed she'd guessed right and gotten away with it. She told His Majesty that he had a huge number of people who did not like him. The servant noticed that the aristocrats had been acting strangely lately. Just moments ago, she'd thought this knight was a terrible man, but now she respected him. Liffey said that she must stay with him until the curse is lifted, and she doesn't know how long it will take, but he must keep her alive. The more complex the problem that needs to be solved, the more carefully she approaches it. She hoped that this way he would not kill her. But the emperor believed that she had made this up to save her life, and asked how she could prove the truth of her words. She assumed he had approached her because everyone was talking about the fortune teller, and he had a very unusual situation. If he had any illness, they would have discovered it by now. Besides, the priests can't help either. It seems he turned to her for help because he couldn't solve his problem. Just look at those eyes. Even as a child, he looks very stern. She didn't even know if she could say that he believed her looking at this reaction. She needed to consolidate her success quickly, so she said that she actually knew what happened to him with Princess Regina a month ago. Before the princess boarded the ship, he gave her a bracelet with a red flower. He did it all, and the princess gave him cufflinks. She knew this before, but she didn't talk about it on purpose, because she didn't want to talk about his personal life in front of everyone. It was a highly secret meeting between Emperor Persilian and Princess Cyril. Only one knight accompanying him knew that the emperor had changed his clothes and left the castle. However, no one could hear the conversation itself, but the cufflinks were undoubtedly very valuable to Persilian. It's all because he's afraid to use them so they don't break. She remembers it clearly because it was her favorite part. The princess accepted his bracelet and said that the flower reminded her of the color of his eyes. And she also wanted to say something else, but the emperor said that this was enough. Liffey thought he was shy and thought she didn't know about the part where he shouted for the princess to marry him. This was their last scene together. Who would have thought? Because then it would turn into this. Persilian noted that she described the event in great detail. The girl said that, in fact, all her predictions come true. A clear picture just appeared in her head, and then she noticed that he smiled. This means he probably won't kill her. Otherwise, he wouldn't be smiling at her. He said straw. The girl immediately said that his faithful straw would be with him, but he didn't understand what straw was. He said he would leave his tongue then, and she wanted her to tell him when he could return to his body and what she saw of it. She wasn't scared at all, and said that she didn't know it yet. Persilian said that if it took too long, her future would be bleak. Luckily, she survived. She thought she would die as soon as she entered your imperial palace, but everything turned out okay. The knight said that he was the only one who knew about His Majesty's current condition, and she was the second person. The girl understood everything, and she was given a room next to the emperor, where Millard explained the whole situation to her in detail. He said that Emperor Persilian had been in this condition for 10 days already, and that all the doctors and priests had come, but no one could help him. But before anyone came to see the emperor, they drank a medicine that erased their memory for 2 hours. There were wizards in the Eckhard Empire, but they did not enter the imperial palace. They were sentenced to death for entering the imperial palace. The ban was not related to the fact that memory loss medications do not work on wizards. In reality, the situation is more complicated. Firstly, Persilian knew how to use magic. He was called the best wizard in the empire, so he could not allow other wizards to treat him. Moreover, all the wizards lived in a magic tower, and the tower itself belonged to Archduchess Dipka. Perhaps the Archduchess is behind this situation. That's why the emperor took a brief look at the tower. When His Majesty became like this, he could no longer use magic, and it was as if he returned to his 4-year-old age when he still did not know how to use magic. The girl asked when magic awakened in him, and he answered that it was around 9 years old, and then if 5 years passed, it would appear again. Liffey said that the same thing would not happen, because she was here to prevent this terrible tragedy. The most suspicious are the Tower and Archduchess Dipke. However, even after 10 days have passed, they are not visible. Perhaps they simply do not know when the curse was supposed to manifest. The government is trying to resolve all issues, but the abrupt cancellation of all official events has caused mistrust among the nobility. Moreover, for 10 days now, they have not allowed her to speak out loud, which she is also starting to babble about, as she already knows, and His Majesty has a lot of enemies. She realized that it was all because of this that the procedure for accession to the throne was violated. Persilian ascended to the throne by killing 4 brothers and sisters. After the former emperor was left alone with Persilian, he suddenly began bleeding and died of cardiac arrest. A throne soaked in blood. This is how Emperor Persilian was described. His Majesty said that there must be some clue in the palace. It seems that this curse was made recently. Perhaps there is something hidden in the palace that enhances the effect of the curse. The girl promised to try to find such a thing. He believed that she might have already noticed something. Liffey said she can't see anything yet. She can't even see within a meter. She didn't understand how this could happen. The knight said that, to begin with, they decided to announce to everyone that His Majesty had taken a vacation, during which time she should find a way to get him back. The girl asked how this place had become like this. The knight said no one had supported it for some time. Liffey couldn't understand why, because this place was so beautiful. It had once been the emperor's garden. Clearly, she cannot discuss the emperor in front of the man who is accused of his death. The girl asked what had happened, and the emperor said that he just wanted to see what was under the pot. Liffey didn't understand why it needed to be broken. Persilian remarked that it was clearer that it had already been looked at. If they didn't do this, they would waste even more time. The girl understood everything and said she would help him. But the emperor said that it was his job, and she should look for things with her abilities. Liffey said she would just mind her own business. But suddenly, she heard someone coming, so she immediately rushed towards the emperor. The knight asked who was there, and who dared to come here without His Majesty's permission. The woman said that she was walking through the palace, and suddenly heard a loud sound, and it seemed like they were going to destroy Philip's greenhouse. The girl realized it was Archduchess. Only one person in the empire can currently hold that title. This man is accompanied by the cousin of the previous emperor, Dipke von Dideus. The man did not understand how such a thing could be done to the greenhouse, the great treasure of the imperial family. They must immediately hold a meeting of the nobles and formally express their dissatisfaction to the emperor. The lady noticed that you emperors have so much to do, and he doesn't even go out. It seems he is very tired. He even decided to take a vacation. She was about to leave when she suddenly heard this sound. Someone had decided to destroy this greenhouse. She doesn't even know who to turn to about this issue. The woman asked if the girl could answer this question, after which she wanted to know her name. The girl said that she could just be called Liffey. It seems that this child broke a flower pot, so she wants the girl to let her talk to him. Liffey started saying that he was just a child, and that it would be better to scold her. The Archduchess said that she would indeed answer for this. She asked what they had done in her younger brother's greenhouse. The Count remarked that she was the fortune teller. The lady was surprised and asked again. Lately everyone's been talking about her. She tells people's futures right on the street. The Archduchess asked what this fortune teller was doing in the emperor's palace. Besides, she doesn't understand why this woman would transform a child behind her back. Liffey tried to say something, but Persilian himself left, thereby greatly surprising the Archduchess. After this, he rushed to hug the lady and said that this man frightened him. The girl didn't understand what was happening. Fortunately, the Archduchess didn't seem to recognize Persilian, but she didn't know what to do. The Count remarked that the boy looked very much like the emperor. After that, the lady began to think about it too. It is different in that it is very beautiful, and they really do look similar. Now she is sure that the Archduchess did not recognize little Persilian. The Count continued to say that they were quite frankly similar to the emperor. The girl said that he was actually the emperor's child. The Archduchess was quite freckled, which could be said of the emperor as well. The Count thought for a moment and said that His Majesty had not even had a wedding, so the woman said it was an illegitimate child. They couldn't believe it. The Archduchess asked if this was really the emperor's child, that is, His Majesty's. That's exactly how it was. She's here to serve this child. The lady said that as far as she knew, The emperor had not met with anyone. Perhaps it had something to do with the vacation. The girl also added that his mother had died. The girl understood that the emperor would be angry if she left her alive, so she decided to kill her. They believed that he suddenly stopped giving receptions because he had a son, and at the same time his beloved died, and he took time off to visit her grave. The girl said that was exactly it, but they didn't understand what this child was doing there. Liffey explained that he would be raised here. The girl couldn't understand why she continued to stutter, because that way she can catch her in a lie, Mrs. Polina, that she is raising this child. She caught me and then picked him up. She asked him to sit still, and then she said that he was a great guy. The Archduchess said that this child that is a prince, and she wanted to know his name. The girl almost said his name was Persilian, but then said he was Perry. This is His Majesty Perry. The Archduchess bowed and said she would come to meet him next time, and she told him to remember that he would not be able to survive in this place. But if he is strong, all this will change. The lady realized that he seemed to like the name Perry. Liffey winked at the knight and thought she was doing a good job. The knight asked if she understood what she had just done. The emperor approached her and asked if this was the scene from the prophecy she had seen. The girl was very scared, and then decided to say that this was exactly how it was. She was very happy that he solved the problem for her, so she noticed him smiling. The emperor said that he seemed to see a scene where someone cut her neck. It seemed that he too could predict. But still, the boy said that he wanted to see what future awaited her. Viscount Jorser said the Archduchess had already seen the prince. According to the count, they had met in the emperor's gardens. The man was in complete shock and asked if this was a place where His Majesty had completely forbidden access. They believed that the fact that His Majesty allowed the prince to go there showed that it gave him a lot of power. Now the palace is growing day by day, and while the emperor was absent, the nobles were busy with this. But now it's unclear where the prince appears from. This seems like a very good opportunity. They said Prince Perry lived outside the imperial palace, which means he's a very naive person. Then he just needs to be near this child. The emperor has left all powers to the prince. This means that the child of his beloved will be the primary heir. Despite being a cruel tyrant who imagines a knife to the neck of his lieutenants, he still knows how to love. He couldn't pass up such a wonderful opportunity to lead an empire. So he asked what modern children loved most. Prince Perry has been living outside the imperial palace all this time. Perhaps he likes unusual things, but this should interest any child. The Viscount was delighted. 5 days later at the palace, the Viscount arrived and said he had brought a gift for the prince. But the emperor grabbed it and threw it at the wall. Liffey approached the Viscount and asked if he knew how many such gifts His Majesty the Prince received every day. He was already tired of it. That's exactly it. So next time he should bring a rattle that will be decorated with pink diamonds. The Viscount began to say that it was very expensive, but the woman repeated once again that she had said that a pink diamond was needed. The man had no idea how he could save up for this pink diamond. The emperor asked if this meant that they would bring him toys and she money. Liffey didn't understand what he was talking about. She was only showing his true level. Besides, this way, he can easily get rid of some nobles. Persilian sighed and told her to forget, and the girl was glad, because he did not get angry. It seems that he was simply tired of these events. When she came up with a story about the print, the emperor became very angry with her. He said he was sending her signals, telling her to call him little brother. However, she did not understand how she could say that they were related, because they were completely different. He was too sweet, so he decided to take his anger out on her for now. To her surprise, everything began to improve, and no one was surprised by the sudden appearance of the prince. The maid did not understand how they could be so different in appearance. The child was very cute, because the prince looked so much like the emperor. Everyone trusted him, as it was good that they didn't know what the emperor looked like as a child. Moreover, thanks to this, because she said that the prince missed his father very much. He was allowed to spend the night in the emperor's room, and now he no longer needs to hide from everyone in the castle. The emperor believed she needed to have her mouth sewn shut. However, many nobles still came to the emperor in the mornings. Up until this point, everything was fine, but people were whispering and saying that the prince had a sad fate. He was born because of the relationship between his mother and the emperor. Well, when it turned out that the emperor was a tyrant's son, his mother became worried that someone might take advantage of this. That's why she hid him away from everyone and the palace, And then the fortune teller Liffey, who was always with them, witnessed her mother's death. Then Liffey couldn't take it anymore and decided that she would bring him to the palace. By the way, this story was not invented by her, but by various servants and nobles. When the count spoke to her, he thought it was hard for her to remember it. By her silence, she simply encouraged them to believe this. Liffey turned to His Majesty and said that now he did not need to hide because he had become more comfortable. He said that thanks to her, he now has a son. Besides, he had a lover because of whom he couldn't look after her. He was still so cute she couldn't believe it was all because of Princess Regina. The prince didn't understand why she remembered this now, but the girl believed that he himself didn't know. Persilian said he and Cyril had similar childhoods, and he felt they were alike, so he treated her very well. Perhaps upon her return, she would be able to assist him, as her knowledge and skills were invaluable in difficult situations. However, the emperor clearly expressed his wish that this child not be involved in matters requiring adult involvement. Hearing herself called baby was a shock at first, but after thinking it over, she came to the conclusion that it was a sweet nickname that only emphasized their bond. Despite her surprise, she was certain that her views on their relationship were absolutely correct. The emperor apparently assumed she was hinting that without the princess's return, she would be unable to solve his problem. This thought troubled him, as time was of the essence. She firmly insisted it was impossible, but the emperor wouldn't listen to excuses. He reminded her that if she failed, her neck would end up on a separate boat floating far from her body. At this point, the knight brought news of a message from the Archduchess. Her letter could contain important information, and the emperor expected more from it than empty words. The knight briefly explained that the Archduchess had expressed a desire to hold a welcoming ceremony which hinted at the prince's special importance to the court. The knight then advised increasing the number of guards for the prince's safety, realizing that the situation required additional precautions. However, the emperor assured him that his own abilities were more than sufficient to deal with any threat, considering additional measures unnecessary. Millard, however, pointed out that the prince now officially represented the empire, meaning his safety needed to be taken more seriously. This thought sparked concern among those close to him. While understanding her arguments, the emperor still couldn't shake his anxiety. Liffey, observing this situation, believed that Millard was truly showing his best side. Preparations for the welcoming ceremony completely changed the routine at the palace. The servants, including Sir Millard himself, were literally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of work. When the prince expressed displeasure the day before, Liffey, with her characteristic concern, quickly found a way to calm him. She gently asked the knight to focus on his duties. In adulthood, Persilian was recognized as the empire's finest sorcerer. However, even then, he had to fight for his place in the sun, despite the hostility of the nobility. Now, he was just a 4-year-old child, yet to awaken his magic. This made him especially vulnerable in a world full of intrigue and danger. The situation required the prince's constant protection. Additional security was inevitable, but trusting people to the emperor was difficult, making the choice difficult. The emperor clearly preferred to keep his distance from people. Even in matters of security, he didn't want anyone around him for too long. Liffey tried to assure him that she would personally undertake His Majesty's defense. Her words sounded sincere, though her concern was not lost on those around her. The emperor didn't argue, declaring that he was capable of finding suitable knights on his own. His confidence left his mistress flustered, though she didn't show it. Doubts tormented her. She wanted to help, but she knew that if something went wrong, she would be held accountable. However, she managed to achieve the desired result. Although she knew that this document delegating powers to the prince would cause controversy, both nobles and commoners disagreed with this decision. Many questioned how a child raised outside the palace could rule the empire. Before issuing a formal dissent, the noble council decided to unite. This was intended to strengthen their position in the future dispute. The prince chose a limited circle of nobles to meet with, as he simply would not have had the strength or time to meet with everyone. The Archduchess's decision to hold a welcoming ceremony was met with general approval, as it enhanced her influence in the context of the events. The Archduchess even decided to organize a celebration in the capital, demonstrating her loyalty to the empire and her readiness to support the new heir. However, the ceremony's true intentions were obvious. Instead of a sincere welcome to the prince, Many simply wanted to exploit his position to gain control not only over him, but also over the running of state affairs. Reflecting on this, Liffey realized there was no point in delving into speculation. Now, her primary task was to focus on preparing for the upcoming events, in particular, choosing a suitable outfit for the prince. The tailors discussed color options with the prince. They suggested red, which emphasized his brightness, and blue, which added a touch of nobility. They unanimously agreed that any color suited him without exception. For such an important event, a talented designer was invited to create the perfect outfit for the prince. This underscored the seriousness with which the young heir's first official ceremony was being taken. Understanding the importance of the moment, the craftsmen went to great lengths. They selected the most sought-after specialist, who promised to create the prince's finest suit, one that would accentuate his refined appearance. The designer assured him that his appearance would be the highlight of any event. It was important for her not only to create a beautiful outfit, but also to take into account the prince's natural beauty, which made her task both challenging and exciting. People often asked the lady's opinion on outfits, but she admitted it was difficult to make a final choice. Her attention to detail underscored her affection for the prince and his status. As one of his guardians, she spent much time with him. This role suited her as she saw it as an opportunity to guide the prince and protect him from palace intrigue. The prince, however, expressed displeasure. He didn't want to look cute, but the lady explained that cuteness wasn't a weakness, but his most powerful weapon in the fight for survival. She placed a cute little bow on him, which delighted everyone around him. His appearance with its fluffy hair, snow-white skin, and ruby eyes was simply captivating. Looking at him, one might have thought he was a true angel. Even the displeasure evident on his face only added to his charm and made him even more attractive. The emperor, noticing this scene, became angry. He asked if she considered him a toy and expressed displeasure at how his son was being treated like a doll. Liffey seemed oblivious to his anger. She admired the prince's beauty, finding his grace and comeliness worthy of praise. To her, he was like a living doll, evoking tenderness. Her desire to dress the prince was becoming almost uncontrollable. She could hardly restrain herself from suggesting a few more decorations, but she knew she had to know her limits. The prince, tired of her enthusiastic comments, threatened to kick her out. However, Liffey firmly declared that she would stay until she found the perfect ribbon to complement his image. The emperor was skeptical of her words, noting that they clearly had nothing to do with her predictions. He looked at her in bewilderment. Liffey tried again to explain that his good looks could be a valuable asset. The prince, however, categorically rejected the idea, not understanding the need for it. Liffey insisted that good looks evoke protective instincts in people. This trait could have played a key role in his safety amidst palace intrigue. She cited the example that even powerful creatures like elephants find humans cute and rarely attack unless they feel threatened. Thus, cuteness isn't a weakness, but a defense mechanism. The prince, despite her arguments, saw no benefit in this. But Liffey reminded him that many were now seeking to seize him, using his status to rule the empire. She added that his good looks could be key to defending the throne. This would not only help him repel enemy attacks, but also win favor both within the empire and beyond. The emperor lost his patience. His anger reached its limit, and he ordered Liffey to leave the room immediately, refusing to listen to her explanations any longer. He didn't understand her words, finding them absurd. In his irritation, he demanded that she shut up and leave, leaving him no room for further conversation. The emperor sarcastically remarked that her mouth was nothing but trouble. Liffey apologized, but insisted she was telling the truth, even if it seemed strange. His confusion grew. He couldn't understand where she got these ideas from, or why she considered them important for their current situation. Liffey, seeing his confusion, explained that she had graduated with a degree in liturgy, hoping this would add to her authority. However, her words only further confused the emperor. This made her nervous. She saw something in his gaze that reminded her of an abandoned kitten, and it filled her with genuine pity. Liffey noticed the jewelry they'd brought for the prince. It looked surprisingly charming, emphasizing his status and special role in the empire. She inquired who exactly had brought these decorations. One of the maids raised her hand sheepishly, accepting her praise. Liffey gestured approval, which only further confused the maid. An inexplicable connection was immediately established between them, one that Liffey found significant. The emperor lost his composure and demanded that both women leave the room immediately. His irritation was so obvious that they hastened to comply. A few days later, the long-awaited moment arrived, the ceremony everyone was waiting for except Persilian himself. He thought it was just a formality, but for those around him, the event was of immense significance. The ceremony officially began, and everyone headed to the venue. The palace had been brought into perfect order over the past 10 days, as if it were preparing for the coronation of an emperor, not for the welcome of a young prince. The preparations were monumental. Court servants meticulously planned every detail to ensure the event was flawless. This created the impression that the prince was already being regarded as the empire's new leader. Among the nobles gathered for the ceremony were representatives of two opposing camps. Some wanted to weaken the influence of imperial power, while others, on the contrary, saw it as their task to strengthen it and support the dynasty. Despite the disagreements, everyone understood that a successful welcoming ceremony could serve as a tool for strengthening the emperor's authority. Therefore, even the family's opponents considered it necessary. One of the knights suggested the prince use the event to find loyal allies among the guests, but Persilian immediately rejected the idea, seeing no benefit in it. Liffey was perplexed by his actions. She believed that improving relations with the nobility could help the prince strengthen his position in the empire. The emperor's distrust of the people became obvious. For Persilian, accustomed to relying only on himself and his sister, the idea of collaborating with the nobles seemed pointless. As a child, he was forced to live in isolation, and later, his magical abilities allowed him to deal with any threat alone. But now, without magic, it would be useful for him to find reliable allies. Nevertheless, he declared that trusting adults was pointless, much less seeking allies among those who viewed him as a child. Such mistrust seemed justified to him. The prince reproachfully reminded Liffey that her job was to find cursed objects, not to try to recruit supporters for him. Her interference irritated him. Liffey, however, explained that strengthening his position could greatly speed up the search and help protect him from those who would take advantage of his position. At this point, one of the men approached the prince, offering him a small gift in honor of his first official appearance at the palace. The prince was surprised, as he hadn't considered the day particularly special. He noted that gifts are usually given on birthdays or significant holidays, but never at such events. Nevertheless, the man insisted it was simply a sign of respect. Persilian reminded him that even a small gift comes with certain obligations. The man, smiling, assured him that he simply wanted to express support and acknowledge his high status. Liffey watched with interest, gauging the prince's reaction. Her thoughts returned to how his handsome appearance and confident demeanor could be a powerful tool of influence. The guests admired his natural nobility. Many said that if the crown prince had always behaved like this, the empire would have prospered even more. Some recalled how Persilio became emperor at the age of 21, taking on enormous responsibility and earning a reputation as a tyrant. For them, he was a symbol of strength and determination. Finally, the Archduchess entered the hall to formally greet the prince. Her appearance attracted the attention of everyone gathered. Since Persilian was still a child, the role of mentor and assistant was entrusted to the Archduchess. This seemed a logical decision in the eyes of the courtiers. The woman apologized to the prince for failing to properly express her respect earlier. Her words were filled with sincerity and warmth. Persilian replied that he saw nothing wrong with it and that she shouldn't worry about such trifles. His calm seemed almost adult. The Archduchess noted that the boy had been carrying a heavy burden. She understood how difficult it was for him to cope without support, especially after his mother's sudden departure. Her words touched a sensitive spot in the prince. He had lost not only his mother, but also his father, who had abandoned the palace, leaving him alone. These memories made him think. The Archduchess, noticing his sad state, expressed her willingness to help. She emphasized that if he encountered any difficulties, he could always turn to her for support. After all, they belonged to the same family. This is undeniable, since Deepka was the sister of the former emperor. Thus, Prince Peri is her direct relative. Moreover, if we consider their family connection, it turns out that the Archduchess is his grandmother. The prince smiled warmly at this realization and sincerely thanked his grandmother. However, he assured her that he was capable of handling his difficulties on his own. She was grateful for his kindness. The Archduchess added that if he ever needed help, he could always count on her. The prince remarked that his grandmother was a reliable person, capable of supporting him in difficult times. However, he was certain her words were directed more at his father. She often said that in order to survive in this world, a person must be able to cope with difficulties on his own, relying only on his own strength. The Archduchess reminded everyone that being born into a noble family is a privilege not to be missed. Such a family offers many opportunities, and one must know how to take advantage of them. She also warned that if he didn't become strong, life would be extremely difficult for him. Her words were harsh, making it hard for the prince to breathe. In response to her encouragement, he promised to try his best. She confidently responded by saying she believed in him and his abilities. Persilian admitted that he felt a little dizzy upon meeting the Archduchess. Her Majesty made a strong impression on him. Liffey, hearing this, advised him to look at her. But as soon as he looked, his head hurt even more. She immediately realized what was going on and asked the maid to bring her some cool lemonade. She claimed it was the best cure for a headache. Liffey explained that lemonade acted as a medicine and asked His Majesty to try it. She confidently offered the drink as a solution. Meanwhile, her attention was drawn to Sir Millard, who looked extremely upset. Liffey tried to understand what could have upset him so. The Emperor, noticing his condition, asked what had happened. The seer explained that one of the escort knights had injured his leg after falling down the stairs. According to him, the knight could no longer accompany His Majesty, so he was sent back. However, the knight insisted it was just a slight sprained ankle and begged to be allowed to continue his duty. The Emperor noticed that the knight had changed his sword. He had had a different one during the day, which raised questions from the ruler. The man didn't understand what was being said. Since he was carrying the same sword, Liffey didn't notice anything unusual either, since the weapons seemed identical. Despite his doubts, the Emperor agreed to his request, for which the knight immediately began to sincerely thank him. The Emperor ordered the knight to be quiet, but Liffey noticed a strange expression on his face, as if something was bothering him. The girl began to suspect something serious had happened. At that moment, someone joyfully exclaimed, "Greeting, His Highness." This was Viscount Gulmover. Apparently, life outside the palace had been extremely difficult for him. He lost his mother at an early age, and then found himself in the palace, where even his own father abandoned him. The Viscount bitterly couldn't understand how the Emperor could be so heartless. He even suggested that Prince Perry call him his father if he didn't mind. Liffey was shocked by his words. She believed he had dug his own hole by challenging both the Emperor and common sense in such a way. The girl couldn't comprehend how the Viscount dared to call the Emperor heartless and yet offer himself as a father. It seemed the height of insolence. Apparently, the Viscount wasn't from the capital, as his name wasn't familiar to her. Such people usually remain unnoticed for the rest of their lives. Liffey could only hope he wouldn't be killed. The Viscount, however, continued to say that his father had neglected him too, and that he understood the prince better than anyone. The prince, tired of this speech, firmly declared that he had had enough and that the Viscount must leave immediately. However, the Viscount continued his speech. The Viscount spoke of the bad rumors about the Emperor, claiming that His Majesty was known as a heartless man who decided everything by force. He declared that he could become a strong support for the prince, one that even a tsunami couldn't destroy. His words sounded increasingly bold. The Emperor, unable to contain himself, rose abruptly, overcome with rage. He ordered a sword to be brought to him, causing confusion among everyone present. Liffey only hoped the Viscount wouldn't be harmed. The Emperor struggled to lift the heavy sword, evoking mixed feelings in the girl, which he tried to contain. Despite his efforts, the Emperor barely managed to reach the Viscount and tossed it before him. Liffey couldn't understand how he intended to use the weapon. The prince shouted at the Viscount to take his sword and behead himself. Liffey could hardly believe he was being serious. The proverb, "the apple doesn't fall far from the tree," was perfect for this situation. Everything indicated that the prince's anger was hereditary. The prince demanded to know how they dared insult his father in his presence. The Viscount insisted he hadn't meant to offend anyone. The Emperor declared that if he wasn't thinking about his words, it would be better if he remained silent. His anger was obvious, and the tension was mounting. Liffey realized things couldn't go on like this and tried to intervene. She said the day was too auspicious to be marred by bloodshed. The Emperor watched the scene with disbelief. He couldn't understand how the Viscount had allowed himself such impudence, even if he had meant something else. Liffey remarked that discussing the father's notoriety in his son's presence was the height of impropriety. She added that this was no time for rudeness. She offered to show generosity and forgive the Viscount. In exchange, she decided to offer him something else to change the situation. The Emperor restrained himself and declared that the Viscount's blood would not be spilled that day. He generously pardoned him, surprising everyone. However, he added a condition. Now the Viscount must end each of his sentences with the words "woof woof," so that everyone would know that his words were nonsense. The Emperor suggested he try it. The Viscount was completely confused, unsure how to respond. The prince asked if he understood what he had been told. If the Viscount failed, he risked losing his head, which completely terrified him. Trying to avoid the worst, the Viscount gratefully agreed and concluded his statement with the words "woof woof." This prompted laughter among those present. The prince noticed that "woof woof" sounded too cute and suggested another option. Let the Viscount say "oof oof," which looked even more ridiculous. He addressed everyone, asking them to report to him if the Viscount failed to follow the new rule. His words elicited a quiet laugh from the hall. Afterwards, the prince said he wanted to go out for some fresh air, clearly needing a break from what was happening. Liffey asked if she should leave, but he categorically forbade it. He was worried that aristocrats would approach her in her absence. The girl thought that he wanted to protect her, but in fact he did not trust her, fearing that she might say something unnecessary. Liffey assured the prince of her loyalty. However, he reminded her that standing before her was the man who had once tried to kill her. She did not object, realizing that if the aristocrats captured her and began to threaten her, she could tell everything she knew. Liffey overheard guests discussing how the oof oof order was too harsh, confirming that the prince's character was impossible to conceal. Everything the prince did provoked heated discussion among the nobility. Their opinion of him gradually began to change for the better. Liffey knew that the aristocrats were against the emperor, but she did not expect them to be so frank in their conversations with the prince. The emperor, once possessed of immense magical power, now relied solely on his loyal soldiers. He was forced to interact with the nobility to maintain his position on the throne. Liffey assumed he was very tired, but the prince hinted that if she solved his problems, he would feel much better. Even if she couldn't lift the curse, she was sure her ability to hide problems could be useful. The prince assured Liffey that she needn't worry, but she noticed that he looked tired and even slightly sleepy. His eyes were barely open, and his face was clearly displeased. Persilian, despite his adult mind, was in a child's body, and this greatly affected his physical condition. His body quickly tired, making it difficult to maintain his energy. Last time, he even fell asleep while getting dressed. Liffey suggested he rest and go to bed, but the prince, despite his fatigue, insisted he couldn't leave the ceremony prematurely. He tried to remain steadfast despite his physical exhaustion. Liffey assured him that everyone would understand that he was a child and needed rest. The prince, already beginning to nod off, admitted that she was right and that he really did need some rest. However, Liffey realized she had made a mistake in suggesting he rest. The prince accused her of treating him like a child, which greatly irritated him. His face darkened with displeasure. Liffey was surprised by his anger, as he was already barely able to stand and was almost asleep. She then suggested that they go to their room together so he could rest peacefully and avoid putting himself under unnecessary strain. Liffey added that if he was having a hard time, he could lean on her, but the prince considered her words unnecessary and arrogant. He sharply replied that he didn't need her help and could handle it himself. The girl, sincerely trying to help, was met with his sharp remark that even her gaze seemed arrogant. This deeply hurt Liffey, but she couldn't leave him like that, realizing he needed support. Suddenly, the prince noticed something strange with the swords, and his loud cry echoed throughout the hall. In the blink of an eye, an explosion rocked the entire room. The shockwave engulfed everyone present, causing panic. The knights immediately began shouting for everyone to be careful, but Liffey grabbed the prince and shielded him with her body. She risked her own safety, hoping she could protect him. Perry, furious, shouted at Liffey for being an idiot, and she realized how bad things could have been. He said she was crazy for trying to protect him when she could have gotten hurt herself. The prince continued to shout that Liffey was acting as if she no longer wanted to live. He demanded that towels be brought to her immediately for treatment. His words were full of indignation and panic. Perry insisted that she endure the pain and remain still, while Liffey complained that her wounds were in great pain. She couldn't contain her emotions, realizing the gravity of the situation. Liffey was shocked that the prince was angry because she hadn't managed to dodge the explosion. She didn't understand why he was so irritated by her reaction to danger. One of the knights, in despair, claimed that the explosion was caused by a precious stone in the sword's hilt. This theory seemed highly likely, as this very sword had been at the center of the incident. The knight wielding this sword died instantly, without even a chance to react. He was the same knight who had recently twisted his ankle on the way here, which could have been the reason for its slow action. Perhaps someone was using mind control magic to control the knight at that moment. The prince said they would deal with it later, once the situation became clearer. The explosion occurred right next to the balcony, and it could have been an assassination attempt on the prince. Someone was clearly trying to eliminate him, and it couldn't have gone unnoticed. Liffey realized that the site of the welcoming ceremony was a potential target for many enemies. She knew that not everyone was happy to see the prince, but she was surprised by how calmly the emperor reacted to the incident. The emperor seemed accustomed to the feeling of someone constantly trying to kill you. He was so unfazed that Liffey felt a twinge of sadness. This was an unusual man, one that seemed strange to her. She thought the emperor had in a sense taken her prisoner. In this situation, she should have fled, but for some reason she ran to him, deciding that he was the one who needed her support. The prince considered her actions foolish, calling her an idiot. Liffey calmly replied that she knew he would survive no matter the danger. The emperor didn't understand what she meant. Liffey explained that he wouldn't have died in the explosion, and if she had simply run away, he would have come back and punished her. She was trying to demonstrate her rationality. Liffey thought she would be less harmed by the explosion if she stayed nearby, and this was her conscious decision. She was a calculating person, which greatly surprised the prince. Liffey thanked the emperor for taking care of her, and he thought it would be better if her mouth got hurt than if she continued arguing with him. The prince's welcoming party ended in chaos. The nobles were quickly interrogated, and the wounded were sent to the palace for treatment. The atmosphere was tense as everyone tried to figure out who was behind the attack. The mages from the magic tower investigated the scene, but were unable to find the culprit. For safety reasons, it was decided to station soldiers outside the palace to protect the prince. That night, the atmosphere in the palace was tense, and Liffey found herself in Persilion's room, where they discussed their next steps together. Liffey approached the emperor, offering to sleep next to him so they could be prepared for any threat. The prince found her suggestion strange and bluntly told her she was crazy. However, Liffey explained that they had to be careful until they knew who was behind the explosion. She needed to be nearby so she could retrieve him and escape with him if necessary. The emperor remarked that she spoke of him as a child. Liffey replied that she spoke thus because he was currently in a child's body and his abilities were significantly limited. A knight would guard him outside, and she would be in the room. Persilion agreed with her proposal, but noted that they had forgotten to ask his opinion on the matter. Liffey admitted that his opinion had not been taken into account. The prince became extremely angry and shouted at her to leave the room immediately. He threw a pillow at her, and Liffey took it as a sign of agreement. She knew his anger was caused by stress, but she decided to stay by his side anyway. Liffey reassured him, telling him not to worry, as she could run fast. She reminded him of how she had saved him a few hours earlier using her speed. She was injured, but survived. The emperor was genuinely angrier than usual, and his anger only added to the tension of the situation. The prince promised that if she were hurt again, he would heal her. He didn't want her to suffer, but her life mustn't endanger him. A little later, the emperor was informed that mages had arrived. Someone immediately told them to quickly begin treating Liffey. However, they were here to investigate the cause of the explosion. The prince, hearing this, shouted that the mages should have focused on healing, first not finding the culprits. He couldn't understand why everyone was so worried about the investigation. The mages began apologizing to the prince. Leafy wasn't mortally wounded, but she needed attention, and 3 wizards soon began treating her. The prince warned Liffy that if something like this happened again, she could die. His words were full of seriousness and concern. He could not allow her death. Liffy promised she would try not to die, because she and Prince Perry were one. This was an important promise to her, one she made as a sign of her devotion. Liffy knew that rumors had spread about her secret ability, and that if the Emperor were in danger, she would be the first to be taken away and then tortured. But she didn't particularly care about her own life. Liffy wasn't worried about her own life, because she was more worried about Persilian. She was ready to protect him at any cost. She could also count on the escort of Sir Millard, the prince's trusted man, who would be with her in any situation. Liffy was more worried about the prince they were trying to kill than about herself. Everything that was happening seemed too cruel and disturbing to her, for Persilian attempts on his life were commonplace. Liffy felt sad, realizing how accustomed the prince had become to such attacks. Liffy said she would sleep next to him, holding his hand so she would be ready for any action. She promised she wouldn't inconvenience him. The prince believed that she was there to protect him, but he was also sure that he would eventually wake her up if necessary. Liffy replied that if he felt threatened, he could simply squeeze her hand and she would wake up instantly. She was confident in her reaction to danger. The Emperor was surprised, asking how she knew he was such a light sleeper. Liffy replied that she had read about it in a book and noticed his habits. Persilian was indeed a very light sleeper. Liffy suspected it was due to the constant attempts on his life, and she realized this from observing his behavior. He asked why she had brought the book with her. Liffy replied that her only purpose was to be close and prepared for any changes in the situation. Liffy said she would sleep next to the bed, so she could hold his hand. She hoped it would bring at least a little relief. She turned off the light and was about to go to bed, but the prince stopped her. He told her to lie down with him since the bed was big anyway. Liffy said she was a woman of sound principles, but the prince continued to insist that if she didn't stop talking nonsense, she would be thrown out immediately. She was surprised that her proposal had provoked such a reaction. Persilian had always been cautious, and she understood that. He suggested that she join him on the bed. Liffy of course agreed, understanding that they both needed protection. The prince said that if she continued to behave strangely, she would be banished on the spot. Liffy knew he was serious. Liffy was upset, but she decided not to argue. She had her own opinion, but she tried to understand his feelings. She extended her hand to him and asked him to take it. She was ready to be there, but the prince was determined. The Emperor told her to remove her hand, as if there was danger he would wake her. He didn't want her to risk her safety. Liffy was very upset, but she still decided to extend her hand to him. Her desire to support him was stronger. He told her to take her hand away because he wasn't going to hold it. Liffy felt his words chill her feelings. Liffy said that if there was danger, he could easily wake her. She hoped that this way he wouldn't feel lonely. Persilian again demanded that she stop talking to him like a child. He wasn't pleased with her concern, but he understood her intentions. Liffy replied that she was well aware of his weaknesses and was ready to support him if he needed help. She was confident that she could be there when he needed it. The Emperor, asking who would be next, awaited an answer. Liffy reported that Count Masons had arrived with his daughter. She added that they were both already in the hall and ready to meet. The gentleman sternly told her not to laugh, expressing his displeasure. He was extremely upset by her behavior and emphasized that such behavior was inappropriate in this context. Liffy couldn't understand how anyone could help but laugh, because people often come to them with children who are barely 4 or 5 years old, and their behavior always causes surprise. A few hours ago, an aristocrat had been in his presence, bringing his daughter with him. Liffy wondered why the child was there, and what was going on with this society. Liffy didn't understand what exactly the child was doing in such a place, and wondered if maybe she had misunderstood something, or if something unusual had happened. The gentleman said that, as the prince might notice, this girl was perfect for him. Perhaps they would have a future and become a couple. Who knows what time will bring? Liffy knew she shouldn't laugh in this situation, but it was hard not to. The man was talking about how the girl and the prince could make a wonderful couple. At the ceremony, the prince demonstrated his intelligence and respectability, which left a positive impression on all the nobles. This inspired a shared goal and a desire to achieve a specific outcome. And of course, all the nobles were thinking about the wedding. Many people came to see him, and Liffey couldn't help but laugh often as she watched the proceedings. There were several such encounters after that, and Liffey had a hard time holding back her laughter, which made each new event even more difficult for her. But she still managed to control herself. Count Mason's had risen from a simple knight to commander-in-chief in the past, and perhaps his experience could help in the current situation. Although it was difficult to hope for this, the prince explained that the count was one of the archduchess's servants, meaning he would be unable to assist them in their case. This put an end to any further expectations and worries. The explosion at the ceremony remained unanswered, as no one could definitively identify the culprit. The knight who carried the explosives died on the spot without having time to explain. The emperor's guard consisted of only 3 men, including Sir Millard, and the knight who had been blown up. This made a full search of the area impossible at that moment. It seemed that this knight, who was watching what was happening on the street, was at an important meeting, and now the question remained as to who he could meet at such a moment. The main problem was the shortage of troops, and Sir Millard felt a great responsibility for security that day. This played a significant role in the subsequent developments. So he began developing a strategy to create a full-fledged bodyguard who could guarantee safety in such important situations. To this end, he created a special test of physical strength, believing that a knight with good skills was trustworthy in matters of security. The count was due to arrive soon, and Liffey announced that there would be a 5-year-old girl in the room this time, which made her think again about what was happening. The emperor, hearing this, remarked that he was uninterested, but Liffey reminded him that the importance of such meetings should not be underestimated. Time would tell what would happen next. The emperor couldn't understand how anyone could take a 5-year-old child seriously, considering it nothing more than madness. Liffey, in turn, reminded him that he himself was only 4 years old. The emperor shouted at her to be quiet, which made Liffey laugh again. Her laughter stemmed from his displeasure and the fact that she didn't immediately understand what he meant. His diction was very poor, and when he again told her to be quiet in an irritated tone, Liffey couldn't help but smile. He was upset by her behavior. He warned her that if she continued laughing, she'd better rest. Liffey said she wasn't tired at all, but he insisted the wound wasn't healing that quickly. Persilian reiterated that despite any magical means, the wound does not heal instantly, and magic cannot work miracles as many believe. She should not rely on its miraculous effects. Despite his words, Liffey felt safe, knowing he was secretly guarding her. This gave her confidence that everything would be all right. He told her to be quiet, and when someone knocked, Liffey allowed them in. It was a man and his daughter who came in to greet the prince. The man thanked them for coming all the way to come and expressed his appreciation for the attention they had shown him. The girl, upon seeing the prince, became very embarrassed, and Liffey immediately began to smile, trying to lighten the mood. It was quite touching and awkward at the same time. Liffey, seeing the girl's reaction, turned to the prince and, smiling, said that it seemed the girl had fallen in love with him. She noticed her shyness and embarrassment. The prince, showing no interest, declared that he wasn't interested. The count, noticing his daughter's reaction, added that they had been very worried about her, but fortunately, the prince looked well. Suddenly, the girl hit the table, her face contorted in pain. Her father immediately asked if she was okay, trying to calm her down. The prince remained indifferent, and the girl became even more embarrassed by his lack of attention. This made her feel even more awkward. Despite her best efforts, Daisy couldn't attract the prince's attention. She tried every way she could to show that she was trying, but her efforts were to no avail. The girl continued to try, despite the prince's lack of interest. She sincerely wanted him to notice her, even though it seemed impossible. Unlike other little girls, Daisy was much calmer. The previous little miss had been very strange, and her behavior was only a distraction. Despite all her efforts, Daisy couldn't win the prince's attention. He remained completely indifferent, and she felt increasingly frustrated. Liffey, noticing her disappointment, suggested the girl try to choose which cookie was the best. She tried to encourage her to keep her hopes up. Liffey replied that chocolate chip cookies tasted better because they were sweeter. This suggestion lifted her spirits, and the girl calmed down a bit. The girl, still confused, turned to His Highness, asking which cookie was best. Someone present told her to choose any, which only made her choice more difficult. The girl insisted that unless the prince told her exactly which cookie was best, she would refuse to eat it. She was stubborn and had no intention of giving in. Her father told her not to be capricious and to eat any cookie, but the girl continued to insist that she would not eat it unless the prince said his opinion. The prince, realizing she wouldn't back down, agreed and told her to eat the chocolate. The girl immediately rejoiced and beamed with happiness. The girl tasted a chocolate chip cookie and then took a piece for her father. He ignored her gesture, which offended her even more. Annoyed, the girl threw a cookie at the prince. Liffey, reacting with lightning speed, caught it, causing surprise among everyone present. Everyone was shocked when Liffey caught the cookie. It was an amazing feat, and no one could understand how she managed it. Liffey noticed that this special skill had been passed on to her by Daisy. She was grateful for such an ability, which proved useful at this moment. Liffey emphasized that this skill was passed on to her by Miss, and now she could use it to help in similar situations. When Liffey saw the prince's look, she knew she had better keep the cookie and give it to the prince, doing so with a look of disappointment on her face. The father spoke to his daughter sternly, telling her not to do that again. He explained that such behavior was unacceptable and that decorum was essential. He apologized to the prince for his daughter's behavior, explaining that she was still too young and did not understand the full consequences of her actions. The father suggested that the prince punish his daughter himself for her misdeed. The prince, in turn, noted that punishment was indeed necessary. The prince reminded them that they should have considered the consequences before bringing a small child to such an important place. This required a more serious approach. The second thing he noted was that the count hadn't considered the consequences and brought a little girl to the meeting. He should have thought ahead about what would be appropriate for such an event. So we need to take responsibility for all of this. But the man says he didn't mean for anything like that to happen. He asked not to be punished. As strange as it might seem, he wanted to be left alone, not tormented. It was his quiet but sincere wish. The boy agreed to the request, but on the condition that he convey to all aristocrats not to bring their children to such meetings. This was intended to avoid further inconvenience. He warned that if anyone dared bring their child, the same thing would happen to them as to the cookie. It was a very serious warning that no one could ignore. The man quickly agreed and expressed gratitude for the leniency shown. He hurried away to fulfill his promise. The prince was so tired that he didn't want any cookies or any other treats. He was completely exhausted by everything that had happened that day. The lady remarked that she liked chocolate chip cookies, which made the prince pause. He asked if such a preference was even normal for her. The girl replied that he hadn't actually even yelled at her, which was quite surprising. It was unexpected for her, but she felt it might be a good sign. There were a lot of girls around Persilian today, and it was Daisy who decided to throw the cookie first. However, there were other things that attracted attention too. He wasn't surprised by the attention the incident was receiving, but he remained calm and didn't yell at the children. This surprised everyone, as most people would have expected a different behavior. Perhaps he liked Miss Daisy, and that's why he decided to spare the children. He believed it was wrong to have any feelings for children, but feelings could arise involuntarily. The girl couldn't understand why he took her joke so seriously. The guy, however, noted that she didn't yet understand what was happening and that this might be due to her age. She probably grew up in a loving and caring environment where such moments were considered normal. It was perfectly natural for her, and she couldn't understand why he was so preoccupied. He suggested that she heard the words, "Don't do that," far less often than "everything's fine." This explained her unflappability in situations where others might have been uneasy. Persilian's childhood wasn't described in detail in the book. It was only mentioned that it was similar to Cyril's, which was a rather odd but interesting coincidence. Cyril's childhood was filled with suffering. Her mother died early, and life in the Duke's family was cruel and unfair. These memories left a deep mark on her soul. Cyril was constantly on guard, enduring much suffering and hardship. But she later proved herself to be an outstanding swordsman despite her difficult fate. Despite her painful and difficult childhood, she often reminisced about it and how it was unforgettable. It was an integral part of her development as a person. It all reminded her of the emperor's childhood, and she felt that they had something in common. They had both experienced hell in their lives. When she heard him talk about his childhood, she felt a strange mixture of emotions. It was hard to describe the feelings, but she knew something important had happened. This feeling could be described as sadness, but there was no word that could accurately convey the full weight of the experiences he had endured. She addressed the emperor and told him he could do whatever he pleased. This was said respectfully, so that he would feel free to act as he pleased. He could throw cookies, or even something else, if that's what he wanted. She didn't mind, though. Such frankness was a little strange for her. The emperor, not without humor, asked if this meant he could do whatever he wanted. His question was light and playful, which somewhat softened the situation. Perry began to smile more and more often, and she felt as if she were somehow responsible for his laughter. This pleased her, but at the same time brought her a slight uneasiness. She replied, yes, if that's what he wanted. Perry, smiling, remarked that if she wanted to say, baby, it would be better not to say it out loud. She hadn't meant anything like that, but now, after his words, she found it difficult to understand how to joke about children, especially when she wanted to tease the prince. She promised to continue searching for a way to break the curse, but so far, she hadn't been able to find a solution. The curse was too well hidden, and it made her nervous. The girl said she was continuing to search, but the spell was so subtle that she hadn't been able to find anything yet. The emperor insisted she waste no time and continue searching. She couldn't understand how he could let her go like that. After all, she didn't know who would catch the flying cookies if she left. That seemed important. The master asked her to be a little quieter. She remembered that she had forgotten about searching for the cursed object and decided to begin the search with renewed vigor. Around the corner, she was met by the count, who announced that he had something important to deliver. This was unexpected, and she felt a slight unease. She didn't understand what the count wanted to tell her, and asked again in surprise. It was something important, and she couldn't understand his motives. The count explained that he had been in a hurry and had forgotten to give her the necessary documents. This explained his strange behavior. He asked her to hand over the documents to the prince. The lady thought they might be important papers, perhaps documents concerning the empire. Opening the documents, she discovered they concerned knights. Apparently, news of the prince recruiting knights had already spread throughout the palace. Apparently, most of the knights were aristocrats. The count said he had once served as second in command and could confirm that these knights were trustworthy. In fact, this was a commission from Archduchess Dipka. He added that it was important to understand the significance of this information. The count said this later, which surprised the lady. She hadn't expected such a turn of events, and asked again to make sure she'd understood correctly. Archduchess Dipke sent the documents hoping they would prove useful to His Highness. This also demonstrated her concern for Persilian. The lady sensed that the Archduchess was genuinely concerned about her beloved. She agreed with the Count's opinion, but was somewhat taken aback. It reminded her of how corruption had crept into the knight's recruitment process, and she wondered if she should hand these documents over to the Emperor. She began to wonder if these documents were part of some kind of trap. After all, she herself seemed suspicious, and her actions could be misinterpreted. The Count continued that he had chosen the sapphire for her after noticing her blue eyes at the ceremony. He thought the stone would look beautiful on her. The lady realized that this could look like a bribe, but the Count hastened to explain that he did this to show the seriousness of his intentions and to pass the document through her. The Count assured her that the sapphire had no particular value. It was just a gesture, and she was the only person he could trust with this document. He didn't expect her reputation to suffer, but the lady considered the consequences if she were perceived as an intermediary in the transfer of a bribe. He added that he trusted her honesty and would convey the document to Her Majesty. The Count was certain this was an important step and believed his lady would do everything correctly. He expressed concern that no one should find out about the bribe, otherwise her reputation would suffer. This was an important point, and she had to be careful. The lady assured him that she would hand the document over to the Emperor and took the sapphire. She decided this was the only right step in the current situation. She thought that, luckily, it was just a document, and it was easier for her to hand it over. But if it had been anything else, it would have been much harder to hold in her hands. When she arrived at the prince's, he greeted her with irritation, asking why she had come. It was an unexpected question, but she tried to answer calmly. The lady said she'd been given a bribe, and the prince was immediately surprised. He couldn't believe she wasn't ashamed of it, as it was a serious breach of etiquette. She explained that the aristocrat had begged her to deliver the document and that it was the result of her work. In his eyes, it seemed like further proof of her devotion. Perry was surprised that she so openly admitted to accepting a bribe. He thought it should have been kept secret, but she felt no guilt and made no attempt to hide the truth. Thanks to the document the Count handed her, she now had the bracelet. He didn't say it outright, but it was clear that this was also part of the deal. She hoped the prince would appreciate her honesty and, as a token of his recognition, give her the bracelet as a reward. She believed it would be fair. The prince asked her to stop chatting and told her not to dwell on it, but the girl couldn't help but remind him that the document had been handed over by the Archduchess. She added that this document would definitely help him. It was a confident statement, and she hoped he would take her words seriously. He placed the document in his desk and was surprised that she didn't offer to destroy it. She was perplexed that he took this action so calmly. The prince explained that he saw no point in throwing away the document, since all these people were supporters of the Archduchess. He would have to talk to Millard to ensure they didn't influence his decisions. These people were close to the Archduchess, and His Highness understood that they could not be allowed to influence the Empire's elections. He had to monitor their activities. The Count was certain that saying it was from the Archduchess would lend the document added significance. He hoped this would inspire confidence, but he didn't expect such a cold reception. This in turn gave him the opportunity to deliver the bribe through her. He quickly realized that delivering the document directly would be odd, and decided to use her help. The lady felt she had helped him, but she was still confused. She wasn't sure she had done everything correctly, but she hoped it would help. The prince said she should return the bracelet. However, he later added something that made her think perhaps she should keep it, but she wasn't sure. It wasn't an easy decision. She knew that if rumors of a bribe spread, it could seriously damage her reputation, and she couldn't allow that to happen. If she really continued to accept such things, it could jeopardize her relationship with the prince. He said that if she didn't return the bracelet, the consequences would be severe. She decided to return the bracelet immediately. It was the right decision, and she didn't want anyone to doubt her integrity. Those difficult days were spent pondering the best course of action. She realized that if she hadn't reported the bribe, things could have ended much worse. However, the prince didn't even acknowledge her efforts. This disappointed her, but she still couldn't allow herself to run away from him. She knew that if she did, she would be immediately followed. She couldn't afford to give up. She had to keep working, despite all the difficulties. The prince couldn't remain so strict and merciless forever. This can't go on, she thought, deciding something had to change. She walked into the maid's room, where the girls looked at her in surprise. They were preparing to cook something for the prince and offered to help her. She decided the best way to cope was to feed him delicious food like a naughty kitten. The imperial servants treated her favorably, as if she were a street fortune teller. They grew accustomed to this nickname, which aroused everyone's interest. No one can remain indifferent to the idea of someone possessing the ability to see the future. This raised many questions for the mistress, one of which concerned the choice of dish for the prince. She inquired with interest what they planned to serve this time. The maid replied that they had planned to start with simple cookies, but immediately expressed concern. His Highness had recently shown no interest in this delicacy at all. This created certain difficulties. Glancing at Liffey, the maid noted that they had arrived at the palace together. She assumed this meant Liffey could offer something suitable, as she surely knew His Highness's preferences. Liffey, a little nervously, nevertheless, shared her thoughts. She suggested that the prince's tastes were similar to his father's, so perhaps it would be worthwhile to prepare something of the emperor's own favorites. Liffey also suggested finding out what the emperor himself had been cooked as a child. The maid mentioned her aunt, who had once served there, but unfortunately, she had no recollection of such details. The maid recalled that after the awakening of magic, His Majesty spent all his time in the tower. According to her, he grew up in this isolation, which left its mark on his habits. Persillion's magical abilities awakened at the age of 9. The maid was surprised to learn that until then, he had never had tea with dessert, which struck her as unusual for a child. When she saw 4-year-old Persillion, his tiny frame seemed even smaller than she imagined. She assumed it was due to an unbalanced diet, though there could have been another reason. Perhaps he simply couldn't eat properly. However, the maid expressed joy that His Highness was now in the palace. She hoped that their shared tastes would help them choose suitable desserts for him. Perhaps with his appetite returning, they would be able to please the prince. She was concerned about His Majesty's condition, especially before his departure. The atmosphere was quite tense, and to understand the reason, she cautiously inquired about what had happened. The maid hastened to assure her that nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But despite her answer, the girl sensed a certain hesitation, which only heightened her suspicions. Moreover, Millard hinted at something similar at the time. He mentioned that the behavior of aristocrats had recently changed, becoming somewhat strange and unpredictable. One possible reason for this could have been Princess Cyriel's departure from the empire. Everyone wondered what mission had necessitated her departure, sparking many conjectures. The maid tried to explain that none of this mattered, but suddenly something unexpected happened. The flower flew into the air, scattering like a smokescreen. The girl, not understanding what had happened, began asking questions. But through this cloud of anguish, the maid cried out that she gave up and no longer tried to justify herself. Her words were tinged with mild concern. She was worried about the prince, who at such a young age found himself in difficult circumstances requiring special care and attentions. She sincerely hoped that her mistress would do everything possible to feed His Highness. At such an age, proper nutrition plays a crucial role. The girl understood her responsibility as His Highness's chief protector. When she asked for more details, the maid frankly admitted she didn't know all the details. However, to avoid misunderstandings, the girl decided to agree to the task. She promised to look after His Highness and ensure his diet was always nutritious and balanced. Later, she went to see the emperor, who to her surprise was completely immersed in work. This made her slightly concerned for his health, but she decided not to interrupt him immediately and instead chose the right moment to speak. Thinking of a way to get his attention, she cleared her throat, signaling she hadn't come empty-handed. She brought him food, noting how unusually bright he looked, as if he were radiating an inner light. She explained that she had brought the finest dessert prepared with the utmost care. She mentioned that the chefs had taken into account all of His Majesty's preferences to achieve the perfect taste and texture. However, the emperor looked at her with incomprehension, as if trying to guess the reason she had decided to treat him. Then the girl admitted that she had had a hand in preparing the dessert herself. For a moment, Persilione, whom everyone calls Prince Perry, doubted her sincerity and thought the dessert might be poisoned. Her indignation at this suggestion was so strong that she barely restrained herself from screaming. Seeing his incredulous expression, she firmly declared that she hadn't added anything extra to the dessert. Her honesty was obvious, but Perry still didn't relax. She explained that the entire palace was worried about his refusal of desserts. The servants were making great efforts to understand His Majesty's tastes and please him. However, the emperor himself considered this simply part of their duties. In his opinion, no one was genuinely concerned, but simply trying to do their job as best they could. Despite his words, the girl reminded him that the servants' efforts to please him were a manifestation of genuine affection. Their attention to detail was a sign of love and respect. She noted that love is attention to detail. Even if he doesn't notice it, he is truly loved and everyone in the palace cares for him. She couldn't understand why he was so sensitive to kindness and so wary of any signs of warmth. This surprised her and made her slightly sad. Watching him turn away from the tray of delicious dessert, she was sure he did so reluctantly. His behavior was mysterious. She was reminded that if he continued to eat poorly, he might stop growing. To this, Perry, already tired of such remarks, categorically declared that he had already grown up. And he added that if she wanted to continue talking such nonsense, she could at least bring him papers for work, so as not to waste time. She considered eating the dessert herself to save them the trouble of tasting it, but then their efforts would be wasted, and the taste test would be a failure. However unnoticed by her, he did try the dessert. She only caught it out of the corner of her eye and decided to turn around so he wouldn't feel her gaze on him. The girl felt a strange satisfaction, as if she had managed to feed a wild cat that had not trusted anyone for a long time. He noted dryly that she brought the food rather quickly, as if noticing her efforts. The girl noticed he tried the choux pastry, an elegant choux pastry with a crisp shortbread crust. A faint smile lit up her face. She decided she'd definitely ask Sophia to make choux next time. It seemed to be the only dessert he liked. After some time, the girl remembered another story connected with the emperor. A few days earlier, Persilian had unexpectedly returned to her the bribe she had received from one of the courtiers. He stated that he could not allow anyone to be near him who accepted such offerings. He also wrote a letter stating that he would review the list of recommended recipients, but was returning the bracelet. It was both sad and hurtful for her. She believed the bracelet carried a special light of kindness and dreamed of being buried with it. Now she had to part with it. The girl wondered what consequences the emperor's drastic action might lead to. Her thoughts were filled with anxiety. After this incident, she began wandering the palace more and more often, armed with a map. Her goal was to find the cursed object that could be the key to solving everything. The palace turned out to be much larger than she imagined. Exploring every corner of the castle took a long time, and she knew the search could drag on for hours or even days. One day, while strolling along the palace street, she saw something she had never expected. A strange man approached her and politely informed her that Viscount Helenols was inviting her to dinner. This news stunned the girl. The man explained that the Viscount wanted to introduce her to his son. To her, it sounded like a veiled marriage proposal. The man repeated with a smile that the Viscount was eager to introduce her to his son. His insistence left her a little uneasy. After the bribery incident, she tried to avoid such offers and was reluctant to agree to meetings, especially on the palace grounds. However, it seemed interest in her only grew. Her assistant was now visiting her more and more often, checking whether she had received her latest letter. Sometimes, even the nobles themselves came to see her in person. At one ceremony, everyone noticed that Prince Perry remained steadfast, and his connection with her only heightened their interest in her. Many began to believe that since she accompanied the prince to the court, there was undoubtedly a close relationship between them. Some aristocrats believed that by gaining her trust, they could get closer to the prince. Now she was haunted not only by letters, but also by suspicions. Tired of the constant attention, the girl decided to openly tell Persilian everything she hoped he could help her sort out the situation. Approaching the emperor, she announced with some timidity that she seemed to have been proposed to. Persilian was so taken aback by her words that he asked if he'd heard correctly. The girl explained that she was specifically referring to a marriage proposal. For a moment she thought he was laughing. The prince covered his face with his hand, but the expression in his eyes betrayed his emotion. He said that it was indeed possible, since there were all sorts of rumors circulating about her right now. The girl remembered that she had once laughed at him, and now it looked like a kind of revenge on his part. She wondered how long he had known about these rumors, but she didn't dare ask him directly. After some thought, he seriously suggested that she decline the offer. Furthermore, she should inform him of any families making such attempts. The girl was surprised by his words. The emperor asked whether she really wanted to enter into a relationship with either of them. She indignantly exclaimed that, of course not, and she was ready to do whatever he said. Looking at him, she realized that even in his child's body, he looked frightening. She wondered how terrifying he was as an adult. The emperor warned her that if she met someone in person, she should be careful and avoid talking about him. She, however, believed that a polite greeting would suffice. The lady swore she wouldn't say a word. She shouldn't. She assured him that even if she ended up underwater, her mouth would remain tightly shut. The emperor seemed to have left the entire search to her, which made her feel a little sorry for herself. Liffey discussed the situation with Sir Millard. She noted that he was busy searching for a knight, and the emperor was busy with affairs of state. This explained their behavior, although she still found it difficult. Persilian was deeply concerned for her safety, so he assigned her an escort. He insisted that she be accompanied by at least one person, as the situation could become dangerous. She believed such incidents should never happen again, but she was still grateful for his concern. She understood that the palace was enormous, and that only made her tasks more difficult. She hoped she could find a way to break the curse. The knight suggested she try using her powers as a fortune teller. The girl made every effort every day to help His Majesty return to his previous state. Liffey laughed as she saw Sir Millard, usually so cold, display a rare gentleness. The man noted that His Majesty obviously valued her, since he even provided her with a personal escort. She countered that it was merely a precaution, as the Emperor was afraid of information leaks. She recalled that she had indeed been receiving a lot of offers lately. Millard asked her to avoid meeting with aristocrats if possible, and promised that she would receive a reward for this. However, he warned that if anyone persistently wanted to approach her, he would be able to stop it unless their title was higher than that of a duke. The girl was shocked by his disbelief. Suddenly, another man approached her. She noticed with irritation that her conversation with the knight had been interrupted. She didn't want to think that this was again connected to another proposal. However, Sir Millard immediately tensed upon seeing the young gentleman standing before them. He cautiously asked what brought him here. The man greeted Mrs. Liffey. She looked him over carefully and thought he looked very attractive. The stranger introduced himself as Kastian von Haidar and admitted that he had long wanted to meet her, which is why he had come to the palace. The girl recognized him. She recalled that in the novel, he was a minor character who skillfully courted the main character, but his image didn't endear him to her, as he later revealed himself to be possessed. She even decided then that she would never allow him to stay with the main character. Now, standing in front of him, she was shocked by how the events of the novel had become reality. The girl greeted him politely, noting that it was a great honor for her to meet him in person. He was surprised that she knew his name and watched her reaction with interest. Liffey explained that she often sees people's energy, so he shouldn't be surprised by her knowledge. She then added that she was amazed to see his unusually luminous energy. He was pleased to hear such words from the fortune-teller, so he eagerly asked if she could spare him a little time for a chat. He wanted to continue the conversation. The lady was somewhat surprised by how quickly the knight capitulated, but it didn't bother her. She was accustomed to various reactions, and his behavior didn't cause her any particular concern. Meryl was known for her coolness and reserve, especially when dealing with Castian. She was always curious about how to properly interact with him, maintaining distance and respect. The gentleman noticed that she had an expression on her face that told him she had something she wanted to tell him. He expected her to share her thoughts soon, but in reality, this was not the case. The lady sensed that the future head of the family would be a kind and fair man, which would serve as the foundation for his family's future prosperity. The man smiled as her words were full of good fortune. He felt a little embarrassed, unsure how to respond to such warm words. The lady noticed that he was literally glowing with joy and asked why he wanted to meet her. This became a curious moment for her. Lately, everyone had been discussing her in the context of His Highness. He'd heard that she was the Emperor's sole guardian, and as a member of the ducal family, he simply couldn't resist meeting her. The Haidar family had always been loyal to the imperial family, and the recent unfortunate incident troubled him. He wanted to understand the situation, to understand how it might affect their relationship. The man was genuinely concerned about his mistress, so he decided to visit her in person. This was important, as the Haidar family had long supported the emperor and his family. Moreover, the Haidar family has always tried to remain inconspicuous. This could explain their desire to remain in the shadows, avoiding unnecessary attention. In any case, he tried to win her favor, and she noticed that with the prince's arrival, the capital truly began to buzz. She also understood that she had to work for His Majesty. She thanked him for his concern, noting that she was very pleased by his attention. The gentleman replied that he had nothing to thank her for, as it was his duty. He said that if she had any problems, she could safely turn to him. He was with His Majesty in the tower, and believed he could help her in this difficult situation. He was confident he could be of use to her son, after all he'd spent so many years in the tower. However, he couldn't fully integrate into her life, so after a year, he switched to homeschooling. Nevertheless, he saw His Majesty frequently. The two ducal families were completely different, and this sometimes became the source of various misunderstandings. Duchess Regina's family was renowned for its fencing prowess, while the Haidar family was renowned for its magical abilities. This set them apart. After hearing about Castian, the lady remarked that he was a wizard. She wondered when wizards had acquired such remarkable physical attributes, as they were usually more frail. She couldn't figure out who this wizard was in front of her. Her expression suggested she was still reeling from her surprise. She thought she and His Majesty might have been childhood friends. It would have been an honor, But she soon realized that this was not the case, and her surprise never left her. In fact, he'd tried to strike up a conversation with him, but he'd always ignored him. It was now clear that the emperor, even as a child, had already considered himself the center of the universe. He thought His Majesty was like that because he had been considered a genius since childhood. However, in reality, he was just an ordinary boy, and this taught him a lesson. Liffey began to insist that this was not the case. She believed that his impressions were due to the gentleman's character, which came as a genuine surprise to the Duke. The lady admitted in a trembling voice that the emperor simply loved solitude, and this was one of the reasons for his behavior. The man noted that she seemed to really know His Majesty well. Rumors had reached him that his mistress had already met with His Majesty. This only confirmed her closeness to the emperor and her importance in his life. The lady said that they had only seen each other a couple of times, and besides, she often heard stories from her mother. The girl doesn't know why, but she panicked because at one point, Castian's smile seemed fake to her. In general, every time he wanted to greet His Majesty, he ignored him. Maybe she's just confused about what she was in the novel. He once handed him a book, but he only glanced at it and immediately left. Then he invited him to go to the library with him, but he simply walked past him. The girl couldn't understand why he was talking about such a sad and humiliating past. All he talked about was how he'd been ignored. His Majesty always wanted to be alone. He didn't want to get close to anyone. Perhaps he didn't want anyone near him, but he still found himself a beloved, and they even had a son. She had heard that people were very surprised by this fact beforehand, and of course it was not surprising that people were interested in her. Since she is the sole guardian of the emperor's son, the young master seems to know a lot about Persilian's childhood. She asked him if he could tell her how tall the 14-year-old emperor had been. The man was surprised and remarked that he seemed to be about her height. That was fine. If he saw Prince Perry, he wouldn't recognize him as Persilion. Also, when he left the tower, he was already quite tall, and he thinks he's about his height now. The girl was in complete shock, and he was surprised because she had seen him as His Majesty. The lady said she was simply amazed that he had grown so quickly in a year. She couldn't imagine them being the same height. Liffey noticed he'd requested an audience with His Highness, so she suggested he come into the palace now. Today, he arrived a little early, specifically to meet her. It looks like his wish came true. Liffey almost fell for his pickup and thought he was a real master. He figured she must have her own things to do too, so that was enough for today. The Duke used magic to create a bouquet for her. The lady was simply delighted to see this. She immediately recognized it as magic. The lady asked if he wanted to give them to her. The Duke confirmed this, as he wasn't only thinking about His Highness. The gentleman also added that he would like everything to be well for her, too. Liffey said it was a bit of a burden for her. She knows that moment when some handsome guy approaches her. Usually they talk about insurance investments and real estate. In other words, they're all con artists. Besides, in the novel, Castian is a minor character and is supposed to have feelings for Cyril. That's why Liffey doesn't understand at all why he's doing all this. The girl was surprised at first when she saw her reaction, so she thought she was too cold. Liffey noted that in fact, if she received a gift above a certain amount, she could be imprisoned for at least 3 years or face a large fine of tens of millions. After these words, the Duke laughed very loudly. He was positively beaming, and it seemed her eyes were better off seeing handsome men than doing any kind of exercise. Castian turned to the lady and noted that he did not want to exchange her gift, so he asked for forgiveness. Using magic, he turned this bouquet into a single rose and handed it to the lady. He hoped that one flower hadn't broken any laws. She'd be embarrassed if she didn't take it. So the lady said everything would be fine. Castian said he would then look forward to their next meeting. This man is very unpredictable. Suddenly a knight addressed her, and she became very frightened. Liffey immediately began to justify herself, saying that it would be very rude of her to refuse one flower. She tried to keep her distance. If he wants, he can check this flower, but he won't be able to determine such things by eye. The emperor asked again if she had indeed met with Castian. The lady confirmed it. The prince did not understand at all why she did this. Liffey herself does not know, perhaps because of this, that she is his closest assistant. The prince also saw him. He just said hello and left, but he didn't say anything about their meeting, so he wonders what he wanted. From what she'd heard from Billion, She understood that the Hadar family had no special relationship with the Archduchess. The family was friendly, but not particularly close. They simply worked together to help the imperial family. When Persilian ascended the throne, the Hadar family didn't particularly object. Moreover, as far as she knew, they did not take part in the noble world. In other words, this family maintains neutrality. Princip noted that it would be nice to have Hadar as an ally, but he's not sure where he stands right now. Perhaps he just came to see who took the throne, instead of the emperor. Of course, she would like to get closer to him. Liffey noted that it was already bedtime, and she would turn off the light. The gentleman didn't mind. The girl also noted that Castian gave her a bouquet of flowers, a fact that interested the prince. But she exchanged the bouquet for one flower. She was uncomfortable, so she gave the flower to Sir Millard. He did it with magic, and it was fascinating to watch. The prince, horrified, asked if he really had proposed to her too. When he saw that the girl was scared, she realized that perhaps not. But she didn't understand why he asked that. After all, she was sure he knew Castian loved Cyril. Even in the novel, it was mentioned several times that the two had met on more than one occasion. It's true that the Duke's children saw each other, but it was hard to call their relationship infatuation. Persilian said it would be nice to have an ally like him, so she told him to try to get closer to the young master the next time they met. The prince thought Liffey liked Castian. The girl, remembering the horrors, asked what he was even talking about. She responded quickly, so he was mistaken. Castian was certainly handsome, but why Persilian thought she was in love was unclear. But if she likes the appearance, this does not mean at all that she loves this man. Moreover, she likes his majesty. The emperor asked her why she liked him. The lady said it was because he was cute. The emperor immediately ordered her out. Liffey said that when someone looks cute, it's the end, and there's no escape. The prince said that he had never been kind to her, and the girl agreed that this was true. She just likes him. But the boy believed that no one in the world could treat someone well without a reason. Liffey believed it worked the other way too. No one could hate without reason, be it family or friends. He had no one, no family, no friends. He revealed his feelings only to Cyril, who also left, and she thinks he is upset about it. So the lady said that she actually had a prediction that told her to love him. She didn't think that such a reason would be suitable for him. He remained silent. Persilian remains silent and pretends to fall asleep. But she knows that in reality he does not fall asleep until she falls asleep. She was glad because at least he didn't call this answer nonsense. The ceremony lasted approximately 10 days, and Prince Perry now officially became the owner of the imperial palace. A guard was also organized to protect the imperial family. While everyone was getting their affairs in order, the girl realized that this was unrealistic. She couldn't find this damned object, and she considered this task much more difficult than finding a needle in a haystack. I was wondering who could come up with something like this. It doesn't look like there could be any suspicious energy coming from here. Walking around the palace grounds, she realized only one thing. The main thing here was not to get lost. The palace is connected to the forest, so one must be careful not to get lost. Because the emperor became a child again, he couldn't use his magic, but he often tried to awaken it. Millard wasn't a wizard, and she could only use it in games. Liffey hadn't managed to find anything yet. But if Persilian finds out about this, he will simply kill her silently. So she needs clues. Currently, the most suspicious person is Archduchess Dipke. Her supporters are the wizards from the tower, and she has always strived to take the throne. Perhaps the wizard from the tower helped her cast the curse. Moreover, she may be wandering around the courtyard without any apparent reason. She decided that she needed to know more about the Archduchess. Liffey informed His Highness that she was going to a tea party hosted by Countess Rowell. He didn't understand why she wanted to go and asked what that flower was again. The lady said that she saw a prediction. Perhaps she could get some information there. She instantly realized and said that therefore she would be grateful if he would provide her with a knight so that he could keep an eye on her. The emperor remarked that this was out of the question. The girl said that a little caution wouldn't hurt. He asked what time she'd be back, approximately. Liffey promised to be back by 5, and he was to behave and not cry. He said she could leave right away, so she did. After the ceremony, many aristocrats began inviting her to visit. Among the aristocrats, with the exception of the families on the Archduchess's list, the most influential family was considered to be the family of Countess Rowell. The girl did not understand why she saw so many people, because the letter said that there would be about 5 people at the tea party. Moreover, she came without His Majesty. They all brought their children here, because the prince forbade them to be brought to the palace. It's like some kind of children's cafe. The ladies believed that she should have come with His Highness. She didn't understand what kind of synchronicity this was, but they still thanked her for coming. She can't even imagine how surprised she was to see her answer this morning. Unexpectedly, many aristocrats also decided to come, so she was busy with additional preparations, so she asks for forgiveness. Liffey said it was nothing special, and she was grateful for the invitation she could leave her coat on, but the mistress said she felt more comfortable that way. Since she became a fortune teller, she only wears long clothes. That's how she shows everyone she's a fortune teller. The crystal ball didn't suit her, because it was too heavy. The countess agreed and said that they could then begin their tea party. Usually, the most influential person sits in the middle of the table, and the fact that they seated her in the center shows that today she is the center of attention. One of the ladies remarked that she hadn't even expected to see Miss Liffey here. They had been wanting to talk to her for a long time. Waking up this morning, the lady decided that she had to attend today's tea party. She is very happy to be able to greet all these ladies today. Everyone was very pleased to hear such words from the fortune teller. The atmosphere is very positive. We need to keep up the good work. It seems like everyone has calmed down a bit, which means she can ask them a question. Liffey apologized and said she wanted to ask them about Master Castian. Everyone was immediately surprised. All she knows is that everyone thinks he's perfect, but they don't know much about the family because they rarely go out. But she could ask a question. It was nothing serious. She just wanted to ask why he'd only spent a year in the tower and then returned. She'd heard that most wizards trained in the tower for a long time. No one can answer this question because he was able to awaken all his magical abilities at about the age of 10. And since everyone in his family grows up to be wizards from generation to generation, they have enough funds to train wizards. Castian studied at the tower to gain some experience, but he had already learned too much at home, so he quickly lost interest in studying and left. The lady understood everything, and the lady also added that this happened at the time when the Archduchess became the elder of the tower. The Archduchess became an elder because she supported the tower so much. This means she has had a close relationship with the tower for a long time. Castian is about the same age as the emperor, and this means that when he entered the tower, Persilian was also 14 years old, and she heard that he had lived there for more than 5 years. This means the Archduchess must have seen Persilian there, so she wonders why she didn't do anything to him when he was still a prince. She knew he would become the greatest wizard in the history of the empire, and that he would soon become a dangerous target that would be difficult to overthrow, but she did nothing. It was interesting to know where His Majesty had gone, and the lady thought that this must be a sad topic of conversation for her. Liffey noted that he would likely need a little more time before returning. They were shocked that he wasn't planning to come, and couldn't understand how His Highness could handle such a situation alone. Sophia mentioned something similar too. In the kitchen, she said she was really worried about him because the atmosphere before he left wasn't very good. Come to think of it, it happened just before she arrived, so she is very curious about this situation that is troubling not only the servants, but also the nobles. Lately, rumors have been circulating about the outer capital, and if things continue like this, the well of the capital may dry up. It hadn't rained for several days, and everyone was really worried about it. Liffey jumped up from her desk, shocked because she finally understood what everyone was talking about. The well's drying up. That's why Cyril had to leave. She had a mission in the United Kingdom, and she left because of the empire's drought. From the moment Prince Persilian ascended the throne, heavy rains began to fall in the empire. But droughts remained a serious problem for the empire, which had well-developed trade and agriculture. Persilian used powerful magic on the palace grounds. I concentrated all my power there to prevent the empire's main well from drying up. But this problem could not be solved by magic alone. That is why the emperor's magical abilities were needed. Because of this, he wanted to leave the capital. But despite all efforts, the drought was not eliminated, and eventually the wells began to dry up, so the princess went to the United Kingdom to negotiate for water. It was at this crucial moment that Persilion suddenly became a child who could not use magic. It had been quite a while since she had come to Roman, so she had forgotten about it. The lady thought that something had happened to her, but the lady said that nothing had happened and that she thought that His Highness would definitely return soon. She herself had not noticed how she had become lost in thought. She wanted to know if the drought would end if he returned to his previous state. It was necessary to know whether the delivery of water from the kingdom would help, and whether people would stop calling the emperor a tyrant. She also wanted to know what would happen if Persilian himself was to blame for this drought. She had a favor to ask. The lady warmly welcomed all visitors to the cozy bakery called Dream. For Liffey, the place proved unexpectedly impressive. After a pleasant tea party, Liffey decided to stop by the capital's best bakery. She hoped they could tell her which desserts were particularly popular. As someone who often uses mental energy, Liffey believed that eating sweets was extremely beneficial for recharging her batteries. She decided she couldn't just show up empty-handed and intended to bring something special. Her main goal was to please Persilion, now known as Prince Perry Liffey, believed the sweet gift would not only lift his spirits, but also give him the strength he desperately needed to fight the current drought. The woman behind the counter kindly invited Liffey to browse the bakery's entire selection and choose something that suited her taste. However, Liffey firmly declared that she intended to buy almost everything there was. Hearing this, the bakery workers were genuinely delighted. Liffey, confident in her decision, assured them she would pay for the entire purchase, which elicited genuine delight from the staff. For Liffey, making such a lavish purchase was an unusual experience. Since childhood, she had dreamed of feeling rich and free, able to afford such an expense. However, reality intervened. After arriving at the palace, she could no longer earn a living with her gift of prophecy. Her new status limited her usual opportunities. Despite this, she managed to save up some money. Liffey decided that, for Persilion's sake, she could afford to spend some money. Moreover, during her time at the palace, she had barely spent any money as everything she needed was provided. The women at the bakery were very grateful for such a large purchase and vied with each other to invite Liffey to come back. Meanwhile, Liffey was considering how best to present the dessert to Persilion, thereby starting an important conversation. The Archduchess greeted her, remarking how fortunate she was to have found her so quickly and on time. She emphasized how important it was that everything proceed without delay. Countess Rael said that she had to be here, and asked the girl to give her a little time because she had an important request. The girl assured him that she needed to return to the palace as the prince was waiting for her. She jokingly added that he could be compared to an abandoned kitten, missing her presence. The lady noted with a smile that perhaps the girl would have a chance to find a little time to talk, despite her busy schedule. If the girl made another mistake, the mistress couldn't even imagine what she would do to her. Her patience was at its limit, and the consequences could be serious. Liffey wondered if she would kill her when she was alone. These thoughts troubled her, especially given her growing anxiety about a possible mistake. The Archduchess addressed the girl, noting that there were rumors that she had been very close to the prince's mother. It was a significant remark that caught Liffey's attention. The lady continued that when the prince's mother died, the girl did not abandon him and went with him to the palace. She wanted to find out if it was all true. Liffey admitted that this was somewhat true. The Archduchess remarked that she had only arrived in the village 3 months ago, and that her stay had been short after all. Liffey asked again. Astonished by this revelation, the lady added that she had learned a few things about the girl, including her mysterious past. Liffey was known as a street fortune teller. She appeared in the village predicting events, including harvests, the emperor's reign, and important aristocratic events. When her predictions came true, she became a true celebrity. People began to admire her talent, and her life changed dramatically. The countess noticed that the girl was close to the emperor's mistress. However, the question arose as to why she was alone in the village, if her connection with the emperor was so significant. Liffey began to say that she hadn't always been alone. The Archduchess called her by her full name and glared at her, waiting for an answer. She asked why Liffey acted as if she didn't remember anything, as if she'd just climbed out of a well. Liffey didn't know what to say in response. Suddenly, Liffey cried out that she had indeed lost her memory, and that she had been attacked by bandits who had thrown her into the well. It was a strange explanation, but it rang true. Liffey was surprised the villagers hadn't told her anything about it. It seemed she'd suffered severe head damage even then, which could explain her memory loss. She then met the prince's mother, and her memory began to return, but her mother's condition worsened. This led her to go to the palace with the prince. Eventually, they arrived at the palace, and the prince wasn't used to being separated from her for so long. So Liffey decided she needed to return. The girl was happy to see the prince arrive. His presence was important and welcome, and she felt relieved by his arrival. The boy asked what his grandmother was doing there. The Archduchess explained that she simply wanted to talk to Liffey and was not interested in anything else. Perry added that he remembered something about a meeting request. The woman claimed they had simply met by chance, nothing more. Liffey said that as soon as the Archduchess learned of her tea party with the Countess, she immediately came to her and brought her here, forcing her to meet the prince. The boy said that this woman was his person, and if she wanted to meet her, she must first get his permission. This was an important condition. Liffey noticed that as soon as the prince entered the bakery, the atmosphere changed significantly, and everything around him became brighter. His presence filled the space with light. The prince invited her to go into the carriage, and once inside, she told him everything, hoping that her story sounded plausible and did not raise any doubts. She added that he cannot stay without her for long, as it greatly affects his emotional state. The boy was angry and didn't understand why she'd said that, since he, on the contrary, adored solitude. It was a strange reaction on his part. Liffey didn't understand what else she could have done in such a situation. Perry was puzzled why she hadn't thought before, blurting out such an incomprehensible lie to the Archduchess. Liffey explained that she had not planned to meet the Archduchess, but had simply stopped by the bakery to buy a dessert for the prince and had bumped into her by chance. The prince let go of her hand and asked again, to which the lady replied that he was always at the palace. She thought he might want something not on the palace menu. He said that he was not particularly fond of desserts, but the lady asked him to try it, at least for the sake of the chefs, to which he agreed. The prince also said that they should take that thing with the carriage, so as not to forget it. He then turned to Liffey, reminding her that she had said she had bought him dessert, and added that if there was no shoe in it, she could have it all for herself. Liffey agreed, but still decided to ask why he came to the bakery. The prince replied that he had told her he would be back by 5, and Liffey should not forget that either. Liffey felt awkward, but he ordered her not to express such an insolent expression, indicating her displeasure. The next day, they received an invitation from Duke Haidar for the prince and Liffey to a banquet in honor of Castian's birthday. The duke hoped that they would accept the invitation and be able to attend this important banquet for him. The emperor considered that there was no reason to refuse and sent a letter agreeing to participate in the banquet. He also asked what dress Liffey wanted to wear, to which she replied that she would go in her usual outfit. He said again that she would say so, and therefore he had already prepared everything himself. Liffey was delighted with how beautifully her outfit was prepared, because her cape looked almost like a dress, and she felt like the daughter of an emperor. She remarked that she and the prince did indeed look alike in their outfits, to which Persilian agreed, confirming her observation. Everyone around them said that they seemed to be one, and given this, their appearance was suitable for such an important event as a banquet. Liffey was shocked that she had a matching outfit with the child. The prince told her to behave properly, as any action she took could tarnish his reputation. The mansion they arrived at was no smaller than the palace, and perhaps the emperor should think about expanding it. Persilian noted that the mansion was built slightly lower than the palace, because they listened to his wishes, and the height of the building differs by only 2 centimeters. The previous emperor authorized the construction of this mansion with such a difference in height that it is immediately obvious how carefully the details were paid attention to. The duke was genuinely glad of their arrival, for this day was especially important, and he was grateful that the prince and Liffey had come. He continued to express his gratitude, noting how glad he was to meet them again. Liffey was also pleased to meet him and thanked him for the invitation, expressing her gratitude. The party took place in the garden, and everything was dazzlingly beautiful. Liffey was surprised as the invitation didn't mention such a location. The duke thanked everyone for taking the time to come to his banquet, adding that this was his first banquet in a capital mansion. It was his first experience in organizing such an event, and he hoped that all the guests would be able to enjoy the evening. Liffey now understood why he was called the perfect man, because his manners and behavior spoke for him. The empire has been experiencing a drought lately, and recently one of the wells on the outskirts of the capital has completely dried up. The Hydeir family had always tried to help the emperor find a solution, and so Castian used magic to show a possible solution to the problem. When Liffey heard the sound, she immediately knew that the prince had made it rain. Rain fell across the entire forest, but not on them. This was surprising, as the magic had been directed over a vast area. The gentleman turned to His Highness and said that if the emperor wanted, he could always make it rain. Liffey was shocked because she realized that it was a great honor to hear from the prince that he needed her. The magic caused a real downpour, and all the guests felt hope looking at the miracle performed by Castians. Among the guests were entrepreneurs, for whom the prince's magic became a true miracle salvation and an opportunity for new beginnings. The prince thanked everyone and said he would consider their requests. With a snap of his fingers, the rain stopped. Liffey knew that natural magic required a tremendous amount of mana energy, and she wondered how Castian was able to make it rain over such a large area. It was a great honor for all those present as they met Endatio von Haydar, himself the great hero. The gentleman was grateful for the emperor's visit and greeted him with gratitude. The prince was surprised to meet the duke here at the banquet, and he explained that in fact his son was celebrating his birthday, and he could not miss this event. Duke Haydar had not left the mansion for several years due to illness, and Persilian remembered that he had met him only once at his coronation. The gentleman asked how the prince knew about the duke's rare visits, and he replied that his father had told him this, as well as information from reports on banquets at the palace. The duke realized that the prince was aware of his rare appearances and noted that there was no need to worry about it. Liffey began to feel cold, and the duke remarked that it was not a good idea to keep people outside for so long, suggesting that they move to a warmer room. Castian invited everyone to go into the banquet hall, where musicians were already playing, desserts were being served, and children were running around everywhere. The gentleman hoped that the emperor would also enjoy the banquet, just like the other guests. A special place was prepared for him, and Persilian was completely shocked by the level of preparation. The hall was beautifully decorated, and separate desserts were prepared for the children, which also demonstrated the care taken with every detail. The prince called Liffey to him and said that he could stay at the banquet for about half an hour, but they had to leave in an hour. Liffey decided she would definitely help the prince and try to save him from unnecessary attention. The party continued. The lady had lost her protection in the form of the prince, and now numerous nobles approached her demanding answers from her. Everyone knew that Liffey could predict the future, and now they came to him asking if they could open a business in the West. It reminded her of the recent tea party, when everyone was also waiting for predictions, hoping for success in their endeavors. Liffey was flustered, but hiding her confusion, she said she felt ill and dizzy. She had developed excellent acting skills over the past 3 months. One of the ladies approached her and asked what had happened to her, thinking that she was not well. Liffey replied that she simply felt dizzy from the large number of people and the strong energy that surrounded her. The lady seemed to believe her words, and now Liffey could retreat to the balcony to rest a little. Her head continued to split, but then the duke came over asking if she was feeling well, to which Liffey replied that she just wanted a little break from the crowd. The duke expressed his gratitude, noting that he had had important negotiations with several representatives, and he was glad that she was able to speak to him at such a time. Liffey thanked him, and they stood in silence for a while, enjoying the coolness. The duke noticed that Liffey had become a little more withdrawn and asked what she wanted, adding that they could talk later. Liffey replied that she just needed time and that she was not yet used to this kind of life. The duke expressed understanding and said that they could always talk in a more relaxed atmosphere if she wanted. He apologized to the lady, saying he didn't want to force her. As a token of his apology, he offered her some cold water, but she replied that if she started drinking, she wouldn't stop. Liffey noticed the music in the room had changed. It was a dance-friendly tune, which immediately caught her attention as the atmosphere began to shift. The lady noticed the duke extend his hand and invite her to be his first partner at the banquet. He asked if she would do him the honor, and this was an important moment for him. She did not understand what exactly he meant, and replied that she must remain close to His Majesty, believing that her presence next to him was more important. The duke, without losing hope, explained that he was having a good time, and that she was his guest, who had come not only as a patron, but also as a person important to the evening. The mistress turned to the maid, noting that she had never danced before. She asked what she should do now, and she was hardly confident in her abilities. The gentleman assured her that everything would be easy, that he would simply lead her, and that there was nothing difficult about the dance. The lady was worried about her simple dress and didn't want it to affect his dignity. The girl still didn't know what to do because she was only comfortable with the cape, which she tied tightly, not daring to take it off, so as not to feel vulnerable. The gentleman encouraged her, saying that today she was the brightest jewel of the evening. So there was no need to worry, because this dance, in his opinion, would end with a yes. Castian remarked that he would be very upset if she refused to dance again, because he valued her participation and was sure that this moment was important for their relationship. The girl decided to agree. The emperor added that it would be a good idea to establish a relationship with Haidar, which could help strengthen their ties. She looked at the prince and couldn't understand why he was looking at her so strangely. There was something in his gaze that remained incomprehensible and unsettling to her. She knew that if she couldn't dance properly, it could damage His Majesty's reputation, which made her even more worried about the upcoming dance. She decided she would try to dance as best she could, despite her fear. The moment reminded her of a film where the main characters, despite their difficulties, eventually find harmony. The main character worries that she can't dance, but she remembers how others danced and tries to imitate their movements. Eventually, she succeeds, and her dancing becomes more and more confident. The lovers look at each other. The wind blows gently, but even in such a beautiful moment, her body reminds her of difficulties. As if she had climbed out of a well, she felt not quite at ease. The lady realized she needed to practice dancing. She stepped on Castian's feet several times, and the thought of leaving the room grew stronger. The Duke approached her, noticing that she seemed uncomfortable in the banquet hall. He offered her non-alcoholic champagne, specially prepared for her taste. The Duke also asked if he could go outside with her for some fresh air. He repeated his earlier question, showing concern and concern. The lady admitted that she truly felt uncomfortable dancing in the center of the room. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and it became a real challenge for her. Liffey noticed that the Duke was amused by her awkwardness in dancing. However, this was not mockery, but rather an expression of joy at having her as his first partner. The Duke suggested that she might hate him for this dance, but he also added that he had long wanted to talk to her, and if they stood for too long, she might catch a cold. Castian put his jacket on her, offering to change seats. He was concerned about her comfort and tried to make her stay at the ball as pleasant as possible. The girl wasn't sure if this was normal behavior among nobles. She thought such behavior was a way to make new friends and strengthen relationships. Persilian realized he needed to maintain good relations with the Haidar family. He couldn't afford to miss this opportunity, understanding its importance for future alliances. However, she lost track of time. While she was dancing with Castian, more than half an hour had passed, and she realized it was time to return to the Emperor. As she was leaving, she accidentally bumped into the Duke. He expressed regret that it was time for her to go, as he had still hoped to continue their conversation. If he wants to say something, it is better for her to immediately feel that he is not entirely sincere towards her. He was surprised and asked if she could actually feel that energy. Liffey remarked that one could say that. She's not particularly interested in the plot of a minor character's sudden obsession with an insignificant character. She's more concerned with the story. Survival in the Imperial Palace because her life is at stake. Besides, she knows what happened to Cyril, so she doesn't understand at all why he's behaving like this. The gentleman noted that she was mistaken. Here he always treats her with complete seriousness. He just pursues one goal. The lady asked what he was talking about, and the man said with a smile that his family had always been allies of the imperial family. They want His Highness to be able to contact their family at any time. Liffey approached His Highness and remarked that she was very sorry, but it was time for them to go. She was also shocked by how many desserts there were after her stay in the children's room. She was so interested in watching the little children playing, who would later leave their mark on the history of the empire as nobles. I actually wondered why she arrived so late. The girl assured me she wanted to arrive earlier, but the guy said that she was lying because she was having fun dancing with Castian and forgot about him. Liffey asked if he really thought she enjoyed the dance. She couldn't understand how he could say that. She also sincerely apologized for being late, but there was no need to say that to her. The emperor admitted that he had been wrong to say that to her. The girl didn't understand why he'd agreed with her so quickly. In any case, she'd gotten carried away, and because of Castian, she couldn't leave the balcony. The carriage had soundproofing magic. The emperor shouted that as soon as she saw Castian, she immediately began to laugh endlessly. This was partly true. Liffey screamed back that she had already told him that she liked him better, and she said the dog devoted to him only had eyes for him. Perry thought she was a fraud and said he'd rip her head off. The girl remarked that it would only make her lose all her hair faster. Persilian noted that he was deliberately pulling out her hair to make it easier to get rid of her head. Liffey repeated that she had not planned to stand on the balcony with the Duke. She had not been able to dance properly, so she had run to the balcony, but he had followed her. And she did it for His Majesty. The Emperor suddenly stopped and asked again. Liffey said he wanted to have allies in the Hader family, so she went out to dance, even though she had never done so before. He couldn't even imagine how much she wanted to leave and never dance again. Perry asked why she'd taken Castian's jacket. A servant knocked on their carriage door and announced that he had brought the cloak she had requested. So the mistress said they could give the jacket to Castian. She chattered so quickly, and it was a good thing the servant understood her when she asked for her cloak to be brought to her. The girl said she'd run off the balcony and forgotten to return the jacket to the Duke, and she couldn't just throw it away. She was safe with him, and besides, she preferred the cape the Duke had given her. Liffey hoped he believed her now. The Emperor turned away and said they were leaving. Liffey asked His Highness not to abandon her again because she didn't want to dance again. It seemed like it was truly hard for her. 3 days later, the lady heard the servant say that the Duke raised his hand and it began to rain. And on such a huge plot too. Even at night it will be able to summon the sun. Liffey thought the last one sounded like the apocalypse. After Castian's birthday banquet, everyone was in a frenzy. Everyone was shocked by the news that Castian could solve the drought problem. But the Emperor, on the contrary, had many more problems because there had been no rain for 4 months. Liffey asked if he really didn't want to ask the Hadar family for help. If they had set him some conditions, he would have agreed, but they say that they want to do it just like that. Liffey was surprised that the Duke wasn't doing this just for the Empire's sake. Persilian pointed out that that was the problem. But the girl didn't understand why afterward the Emperor remarked that she sounded just like the people, but he asked what about the prince and how he had helped in this situation. Besides this, rain won't save the Empire. If it did, it would have done so long ago. Liffey noticed that the Duke was in a heavy downpour. This rain can last for a maximum of 30 minutes. Even with maximum use of magic, it will only be able to cover part of the territory. The drought in the eastern part of the continent will not be helped by a 30-minute rain. The lady believed that, if she let this rain fall in the most dangerous area, it would save the situation. But this is not true. This spell requires a lot of mana, and it can be used a maximum of twice a day. This way, he'll only be able to bring down a small part of the Empire. But during this time, he might be hailed as the Empire's savior from a long drought. After this, he will definitely become popular among the inhabitants of the Empire and will begin to be compared to Prince Perry. He can ask the Duke constantly. Because of this, Prince Perry will be in his debt. First, he needs to think everything over. She too should refrain from walking outside the palace for now. The Archduchess asked that His Highness travel throughout the Empire to reassure the people. The Aristocratic Association requested a meeting regarding the drought. The residents aren't particularly worried about the drought. If the prince were to be in front of the residents, it would make things much easier for them. For them, the principal is a new goal. The lady noted that, besides, he would be able to personally inspect the well's condition, and if he needed anything else, he could contact her. Also, His Highness can fully trust the Hadar family, since he has no other choice. This woman is simply openly mocking the prince. It's completely unclear what he should do. A few days later, everyone was shocked that he wouldn't give the Duke his consent out of fear of losing power. He had just come to her, but he had already shown his greed. They believed he would destroy this empire. The lady was shocked that they would even say such a thing. The maid confirmed it and remarked that it was very sad, and that she wouldn't want His Highness to suffer because of it. The prince said they needed to go. Millard said he would prepare an escort. Liffey whispered to Sir whether His Majesty must go there. They say the imperial family has divine blood, so the prince's arrival alone will calm the people somewhat. This legend has been passed down from generation to generation since the founding of the empire. The prince arrived at the well and saw for himself that it was dry. Liffey approached him. The lady and in principal heard strange sounds, and when they turned around, they saw that the knights were holding a man. The man shouted and asked why he had only come today, since his daughter had not been able to drink clean water for several days. They wanted to pour a bucket of something red on the prince, but the lady covered it with herself. The guy didn't understand why she did it. Liffey realized it was just wine. She was afraid it was something dangerous. It's a good thing Persilian didn't get wet. The lady said she was glad he didn't get wet. So the girl noted that it was very good that she did not make the cape that he gave her. She wanted to, but then she saw a vision and decided to keep it. The emperor asked why she was unable to protect this clothing with her predictions. The lady was very surprised, and he remarked that it was his fault, and that they needed to speak with Duke Hadar as soon as possible. The girl believed that the most important thing was that he was all right. The emperor did nothing because he saw no point in defending himself, but she was one of them. The girl interrupted him and said it was her fault too. She still hadn't been able to find the cursed object. She fails to provide him with the help that he himself needs most, but in return, she tries to help him in some way. The prince didn't understand why she was doing this. Then a knight approached them. He wanted to know what he should do with this reactionary. He believed that the emperor would say that he should be placed in prison or executed. People who want to harm the imperial family are punished immediately. They can be executed on the spot. The emperor said no, and he would do so, saying he had not heard anything since all the discontent of the inhabitants was on his conscience. He didn't come here to show off his power. The girl was shocked because he even wanted to behead the nobleman during the welcoming ceremony. Liffey is touched by the fact that Persilian has become a little kinder, but if he leaves it, it could cause even more chaos next time. Instead, he asked them to take a bottle of water from the carriage and promised that he would get water, but they would have to come in person to do so. The prince said they could come to the palace tomorrow. This is a kind punishment from the prince. Everyone is very grateful to him, and the lady said that he had a very witty and kind punishment. She was so worried that this situation could cause a lot of trouble for him. He's getting so soft he's about to turn to jelly. Persilian pointed out that she had told him there were other punishments besides beheading, but he couldn't completely dismiss the situation because they had harmed her. But the man asked if he was really going to solve the problem with a few buckets. He should know that even the capital's central fountain has dried up. 5 years have passed since His Majesty ascended the throne. Since then, the drought has gotten worse and worse, but his numbers looking at this decided to escape. Liffey started screaming and lunged at the man, asking if 5 years had really passed. 5 years have passed since the central fountain dried up. Millard wasn't quite sure what was happening to her and noticed that she didn't know what she was doing, so she asked to get into the carriage. The girl said that it would rain, and she clearly remembers who sent the letter that Persilian sent to Princess Cerule. And then, in a letter, he wrote about the state of the empire. Liffey said it would rain in the empire. She was so preoccupied with the drought that she completely forgot about the letter when in the 5th year of Persilio's reign, a record amount of torrential rain fell on the empire. She turned to His Highness and said that in the 5th year of his reign, there would be very heavy rain. He doesn't understand how he can trust these words, but she assured him that she saw it in the prediction. There are 5 days left until this anniversary, and it seems she wants him to wait and not ask the Duke for help yet. He himself said he didn't want to ask for help because it would be a long wait. The boy said that now wasn't the time to boost his self-esteem and asked what would happen if it didn't rain. The book said the emperor said it was raining, but what if he said it in a voice so surreal would worry less? That's entirely possible. The emperor said that if the rain did not come and the Duke came to the rescue later, the situation would worsen. Her words gave a lot of hope, but the consequences would be enormous. The lady asked him to believe her that there would be enough rain that day to fill the central fountain. He didn't understand why she was talking specifically about the central fountain. It was because he wrote it that way in that letter. Liffey announced that she intended to spend the entire day at the fountain, starting early in the morning. If the emperor didn't go, she was ready to leave, and he might simply send her away. The emperor was stunned by her words, and the girl explained that the inhabitants of the empire were in great disarray, and someone had to take responsibility for it. All the ladies, as well as the emperor himself, called her a fortune teller. She believed that responsibility for the future must be taken upon oneself if the prediction turned out to be false. The emperor asked him not to do this, but the girl noted that if the prediction did not come true, he would be able to say that the evil fortune teller had been deceived, and this would help him punish her. This thought surprised the emperor, and he didn't know how to respond. He was struck by Liffey's confidence in her words and the offer she had made. Liffey believed that the emperor might then secretly forgive her, as such steps are often taken in politics when one needs to hide one's kindness or weakness. She noted with a smile that she might not be able to avoid imprisonment, and even if she did, it wouldn't help her achieve her goals, as the consequences would be inevitable. The girl believed that the emperor's curse would remain with him, but she still wanted to do something to help him, because his suffering touched her heart. The archduchess, addressing the emperor, expressed doubt in the fortune teller's words, since even priests are skeptical of such statements, and it is difficult to believe in their veracity. She continued that the longer the emperor delayed action, the faster the continent dried up. No matter how close he and the fortune teller were, time was running out. The emperor could not rely on the words of an unfamiliar fortune teller, deciding from the very beginning to take responsibility for everything that would happen in the future. The men in the room tried to explain that they had no intention of succumbing to the fortune teller's influence. The emperor would be better off heeding the archduchess's advice. The prince ordered the man to remove his hand, and he obediently complied, realizing that in the prince's presence, one should not make inappropriate gestures. The emperor discussed the situation with Duke Hadar. If there was no rain, they would artificially bring on the 5th anniversary of his father's reign, so as not to disappoint the people. The aristocrats agreed with this plan and expressed their support, saying that they understood how important it was for the emperor that everything went smoothly. The archduchess, understanding the gravity of the situation, noted that even if it rained in one place, it wouldn't be enough for the entire empire. The problem couldn't be solved locally. The emperor believed the situation with Duke Hyder would be similar. After this, the archduchess suggested going elsewhere to provide assistance, and then leaving. Liffey, realizing that everything depended on her actions, emphasized that a person confident of winning is often called a cheater in gambling. The emperor wondered if Liffey thought he was a fraud, but realized she was simply pointing out the need for at least a small amount of doubt in any matter. Liffey stated that she must leave at least 1% uncertainty in her forecasts. For this small percentage, she would be willing to take full responsibility. The 5th anniversary of the emperor's reign was a significant date in the 21st year of the empire, and all attention was focused on how the rain situation would develop. Everyone present watched the fortune teller attentively as she declared that rain would definitely fall that day. She became the object of everyone's interest. Everyone was curious about what would happen if the rain didn't start. Liffey wondered what would happen next, and she knew she might just be taken away if she made a mistake. Despite all the dangers, the emperor chose the more risky path and bet everything on Liffey, entrusting his fate to her, despite the possibility of failure. If there was no rain, the consequences would be serious. The prince turned to Liffey and asked her what she thought about this, unsure of what to expect in the future. Liffey replied that nothing was known yet, and therefore there was no need to worry. But there was a hidden anxiety in her words, as the situation was so uncertain. The emperor didn't understand why they arrived at the fountain at precisely midday. Liffey explained that the nobles couldn't observe all day, so they had to choose a precise time. She added that it was just a coincidence, not a special sign. Perry, surprised, asked again, not understanding how this related to her prognosis. Liffey explained that the chance of rain was only 5%. She considered midday the most logical time to check, although she had previously promised a 99% chance. If it didn't rain, she suggested to the emperor that they quickly escape and, if necessary, send Sir Millard for her to solve the problem. At this moment, the temple bell rang, announcing that noon had arrived, and all eyes turned to the fortune teller. Liffey asked the emperor if he could approach the fountain, but he admitted that he did not know how to use magic, leaving her in the dark. Liffey thought it would be a good idea to make a spectacle of the moment, and decided that the emperor should play his part in the show as intended. However, she soon noticed that the crowd began to shout that the earth was shaking, and everyone immediately froze in anticipation of events. But it soon became clear that it was not earth, but water, and everyone realized that the source of the phenomenon was the fountain itself. Liffey didn't understand at all what had happened, that water had started flowing from the fountain. The nobles were also shocked, and after that, it began to rain. Everyone began to praise His Majesty the Prince. Liffey was shocked, because these people did not believe in her predictions. Perry approached her and asked if she really saw this in the prediction. Liffey smiled and told him it was raining. She also put her raincoat on him. On the 5th anniversary of the Emperor's reign, it rained the heaviest rain in the history of the empire, which swept across the entire empire. This phenomenon was more like the disintegration of the empire, so people called this event a blessing. Moreover, the prince was present at the spot where the first rain fell, and because of this, after the 5th anniversary, people began to trust the imperial family more. Things are indeed going well. Sir Millard remarked that it was all thanks to the lady. Liffey remarked that he was now more polite to her. The man believed that anyone who saw that scene with the rain, I would behave the same way. It was just unbelievable. The girl recalled asking him to find out what those strange sounds were. When the water suddenly gushed from the fountain, they discovered that the system had malfunctioned. The system was not working due to drought, but after a large flow of water, the parts failed and the regulator broke. Further investigation will be conducted. It will be difficult to determine the cause. Liffey was shocked because there was no water, but suddenly there was a sharp gush of water, and I wondered where it came from. Perhaps Persilione subconsciously summoned the water with magic, or some miracle occurred. In the main palace opposite the office, the lady was very glad because they met Mrs. Liffey again. The lady said she had come here to report. Indeed, she had put all the documents in order and brought them to His Majesty. After Persilione became a child, he single-handedly handled almost all government affairs. Because of this, he did not know which of the servants he could trust. He did these things on his own, but his childish body was not ready for this, so he often dozed during the day, so he eventually ordered that an assistant be provided to him, and she came running right away. This is Elaine von Spade, the youngest daughter of the Marquis Spade, who graduated from the Imperial Academy with honors. As soon as she came of age, she took over the management of her family. As far as she knows, Persilione chose her as soon as he saw the list of candidates. In addition, Elaine is the only younger sister of Cyril's lover, who is the main male character in the novel, and she is also a character in the novel. She is a cold but sensitive person. At the same time, even though she was the protagonist's younger sister, she liked that she gave off the feeling of an older sister. The lady noted that at the very beginning, she thought that state affairs were handled by vassals or Liffey, but she was very surprised that His Majesty was handling them personally. The lady said he couldn't trust others with such important tasks. Elaine remarked that His Highness's style of handling paperwork seemed to match His Majesty's. Liffey said that His Highness is a quick learner, and besides, you can't crush the genes with your fingers. This is indeed true. In fact, the blood of the imperial family is considered sacred, and sometimes within the imperial family, there are individuals who receive divine blessings. Most often this concerns intellect. Liffey didn't even know about such a thing. The girl said it seemed he'd been blessed since birth. Liffey was a little worried about whether he could trust her completely. She said she still needed to get the rest of the paperwork sorted, so she'd be on her way. Liffey came to the temperature and asked if there was a reason he hired the assistant and head of the Spade family. She's smart and gets things done quickly. She is worried that she will begin to doubt the identity of the prince they spoke to her. Persilione asked what they had talked about. The girl recounted the conversation, so the emperor asked her what she had said. Liffey said she had said he was a quick learner and must have been blessed by God. And she had also talked about genes that couldn't be crushed with a finger, and so on. Princip noted that she believed her words, as in the Spade family, it was customary to trust others. The lady understood everything. For some reason, she started talking about trying a blessing herself. It seems she truly trusts others, but she needs to be careful with scammers who cheat with insurance, real estate, and so on. The emperor blushed and remarked that Cyril had said the same thing, that trust ran in the family's blood. She'd said how wonderful it was that with such a trusting nature, Elaine had managed to become the head of the family, and that this set her apart from them. Liffey was absolutely delighted, because this was not told in the novel. She would have liked to learn more from such dialogues. Liffey suggested that His Highness write to Sorrel about this, and asked if they often corresponded with the lady. The gentleman said that wasn't true. She'd written to him once and asked him to send a reply to her letter. The lady asked what she'd written about. Perhaps she wanted to know more about Persilien's situation, and the fact that he had a lover who bore him a child, which could ruin their relationship. The girl noted that he might say that he was doing well, and ask how she was doing. The emperor asked what to do if all was not well. Liffey noted that if he didn't want to lie, he could tell her what was happening in the empire. He can write about it raining. He agreed that would be appropriate, and he can talk about it raining, and there is no need to worry about it. Liffey made her prediction because she remembered the letter Persilien had written her from the novel. Now he was writing her another letter with the same content, and she hoped nothing bad would happen. After all, they should do, just like it was in the book. Perry said that Duke Castian returned to the capital today, and he requested an audit for tomorrow. Perhaps she could meet with him too. The girl remembered, because she also knew that today he would return from the eastern continent. And then she noticed that His Highness looked somehow strange. He kept talking, it must just be because of the rain. Then Sir Millard immediately ran up to them and asked what was going on. Liffey told the knight that he was on fire, so she asked for a towel. Liffey couldn't summon a priest or a wizard right now, so she decided to move him to the bedroom first. Now she understood why his face was so red. He hadn't even noticed he was sick. He's not thinking about his safety at all. The fever doesn't seem to be going away, and he was breaking out in a cold sweat. This scared Mrs. Liffey. Then, after a huge flash of light, the Lord turned into a real emperor. Liffey couldn't understand what a handsome man he was, or why the curse had suddenly disappeared. She needed to call Sir Millard immediately. The emperor turned to her and noticed that she was so strange and did not understand at all why she was constantly doing this. The girl didn't know what he was talking about, but she needed to let go of his hand. But he held her hand and asked her not to go and do this. Liffey had no idea what was going on here and sat there very confused. 2 days had passed since Persilien lost consciousness. That day she thought the curse had lifted, but when Sir Millard returned, Persilien had become small again. Perhaps she wanted the curse to go away so badly that she was just imagining it, but it seemed very realistic. But fortunately, after this, the temperature quickly dropped, but it was decided that the prince needed to rest for a couple more days for the sake of his health. In fact, Sir Millard knelt down and begged Persilien to rest. At that moment, Sir looked unwell. Perhaps something similar had happened before. The lady hoped he enjoyed it. Before he could say anything, she immediately announced that she had prepared it. She didn't understand what kind of reaction it was, and said that in fact it was Sophia who did it, but she did the final test. She was doing the tasting. Liffey thought it must be some aristocrat coming to say hello again, and she couldn't understand how anyone could come to visit so early in the morning, so she said that she would deal with it herself. When she came out, she reported that His Highness, to be honest, was on sick leave due to a cold, but he would soon recover. The Archduchess stood before her and asked how she dared to say such a thing to hers. The girl immediately became frightened and surprised, and she also asked what had interested her and brought her here. She noticed that his Sochi lost consciousness, and she should have definitely come after that. Liffey agreed, but she didn't think that such words were suitable for approaching a sick person. The Archduchess noted that she wasn't very good at hiding her emotions. She herself didn't know how to behave around the sick. The lady is here to report to His Highness. Liffey supposed it must be a report of this morning's meeting, where they had discussed the rainy day that Prince Perry had been unable to attend today. The Archduchess noted that the street fortune-teller Liffey had this time managed to predict the day on which it would rain. And I really want to know what of all her words is true and what is a lie. Liffey was upset and shocked that she pretended to be worried about the prince, and also pretended that she came to give a report. The girl then whispered that she had actually come to threaten her, and didn't understand how she wasn't ashamed. Then the Duke showed up. She was so ashamed, she decided to pretend nothing had happened, so as not to ruin their relationship. The gentleman said that he would like to ask for an audience with His Highness, but he had only just heard the news of his illness. It was very good that the Duke pretended that nothing had happened, and she was surprised that no one told him about it. Immediately after arriving in the capital, he fell asleep, so he did not hear the latest news. Liffey found it remarkable that someone as perfect as the Duke could sleep through all the news. He asked her to go for a walk, and she accepted. There are a lot of beautiful flowers in the garden. He also saw beautiful flowers on the eastern continent and was very surprised when he saw them the next day after the rain. Liffey noted that he had done a great job of going there, but he couldn't agree. What of it that he himself really wanted to go there? He was so pleased that His Highness approached him with a request. But when he arrived and saw the rain, he was truly happy at that moment. Suddenly, he saw black clouds descend and rain begin to fall, and at that moment, he felt it was a miracle. Liffey was afraid the Duke might be offended by his needless departure. In fact, she was worried he would be offended because his trip to the eastern part was in vain, and she was glad that wasn't the case. The Duke remarked that, to be honest, he was upset that it had only started raining, but he was upset by the fact that it had not been put to use. Liffey began to say that everything was supposed to happen on that very day. She'd received a sudden prediction. The Duke was surprised and asked if she was truly worried about him now. She confirmed this, so the gentleman said that in that case he had a request for her. He heard that there would soon be a festival in the capital square, and it was decided to hold a festival in honor of the memory of that rainy day. So he wants to invite her to go there together. In fact, he's never been to a street festival before and really wants to go with her. The lady was surprised when she heard about this and remarked that it was a very good idea. The gentleman was glad she agreed, but Liffey interrupted him and said that he could go with His Highness. He would have time to recover by then. The festival was just an excuse. In reality, he wanted to meet Persilian. That's what the lady thought. When you go to events like that as a child, they stay in your memory forever. She couldn't understand why he was looking at me. Then that expression on his face, the now familiar look of an abandoned kitten. She noted that he had said that he wanted to get closer to His Highness, and this would be a good opportunity for him. A plaque near the fountain stated that this was the spot where Prince Perry stood. Persilian was the main figure at this festival, but he preferred to attend the festival in secret. The three of them changed into raincoats and acted as his escort. The lady offered him an autograph, but the prince told her to be quiet. The Duke offered to lift it so he could see better, but Liffey jumped forward and said that she had to do it. The man believed that he would be more reliable in this regard, but the girl believed that it would be better for her to do it instead of him. The prince had told the two of them not to come near, so he relied on his Sir Millard. Liffey turned to His Highness and said the fountain was full. He really did look happy. Persilian very rarely shows positive emotions, and from this little smile, you can tell that he is very happy. The lady noted that he had checked the well. Now it was time to enjoy the festival. She suggested eating something tasty. The lady bought some sweets and suggested that the Duke treat himself to some too. Liffey noticed that he seemed to like sweets, so she offered him some more. He's a grown man, so he doesn't understand why she decided he likes sweets. Liffey said she just imagined it. Actually, it was in the book in the scene where Cyril gave him chocolate after finishing fencing practice. Castiane had a belief that only children liked sweets, so he said that he would not eat sweets. She said there was nothing strange about it, and that he too could like sweets. It seemed this was a kind of consolation from the princess, and after that, the Duke gradually began to like his mistress. Liffey told him to be honest about what he liked. There was nothing wrong with that. She also told the young master that they had come here with the Duke, but the prince did not understand what she meant. The lady asked if they were there as an escort. They were indeed, but it seemed there were no other gentlemen here besides him. The Duke smiled and admitted that he too saw no one. And it was true, he was also very grateful for the treat. The ladies were absolutely delighted when they saw the very cute baby, but he immediately ran away. They chatted about how he must be shy. Liffey thought that if they saw his face now, they would immediately change their minds. Besides, Sir Millard looked upon Persilian as his son. She supposed the knight was very glad to have come here with the young master. It really was, so he didn't understand it himself. He felt excited. His younger brother had always wanted to go to a festival like this. Liffey was thrilled to learn he had a younger brother. Millard noticed that he was there, and she noticed that he used the past tense. Sir explained that he had died before he was even 4 years old, and he was the same height as the young gentleman. He knows he shouldn't think about marriage when he looks at the young master, but sometimes he just can't. Now she understands why Millard had that reaction when Persilian lost consciousness. It seems the Emperor knows of Brother Millard's death, which is why he agreed to rest. And it seems that this is also why Sir Persilian is so protective. The lady hopes his brother has found a good place. The gentleman thinks it's true since she says so. He also noticed that she's getting dressed and that he's relaxing in Simeon's arms. Simeon is the state religion of the empire, and the country's founding is also connected to this religion. The knight asked her to wait, as he had something to tell the young master about Simeon. She thought about how good their relationship was. She hoped that today would go well. Suddenly, a bag was thrown over her head, and she was grabbed. Her friends didn't notice. After this, the girl was thrown into some alley, and the robber was shocked that she did not lose consciousness. Then she pretended to lose consciousness so that they wouldn't beat her anymore. The street fortune teller Liffey, but the girl said he was mistaken, and she had already heard that they looked alike, but she had no relation to her. He shouted at her to tell him immediately everything she knew about the identity of Prince Perry. She said that she would tell me everything. His Highness turned 4 years old this year. He lives in the main palace of the Imperial Palace. He lives in the Emperor's room, wakes up at 7 o'clock in the morning, has breakfast at 8 o'clock, lunch, a little after noon, and dessert is served at about 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He has a huge variety of desserts, but his favorite dessert is choux. They didn't even see how cute he was at that moment. If they're wondering who she is, she'll tell them all now. Her name is Liffey. She began her career as a fortune teller, but for convenience, they've started calling her by her shortened name. She had so many clients that she started creating her own personal order list. The man yelled at her to simply answer the question of where he was and give them all the information. She almost let it slip that His Majesty had dragged her into the palace, and she didn't understand why everyone was so interested in the emperor. The man said he would kill her if she continued to talk nonsense. He believed it would be better to mend relations with the prince before the emperor returned. They want to deal with the prince while the emperor is not in the capital, so that they can use this method to blackmail him later. The girl said it was a complete misunderstanding, and she had no way of contacting His Highness. The man insisted she shouldn't lie to him. They thought she wanted to die because she kept talking nonsense. She really wouldn't be able to contact him, but she could solve that problem with her powers of prophecy. She believed that they knew about her abilities. It was she who predicted the date when it would rain. Hello, right? The main thing now is to stall for time until the emperor arrives. She said the prediction requires great concentration, so they should wait a little. 10 minutes later, everything was the same, and the lady did not understand why he was not there. He should have found her by now. The man asked if she was really trying to see the prediction, because she was doing it for too long. The lady said that she needed more concentration. It would take longer because His Highness was far away. The man remarked that she seemed to have found the courage to simply stall and not respond, but the girl shouted that she already saw. These people are now enjoying a cool evening outside in early autumn, and chocolate is coming in. They asked if she was really serious about what she was saying, so they decided that she deserved to die, and the girl realized that she was about to die. But then she noticed that she had thrown them off, and was shocked that she had actually done it. They didn't understand how she could do this to them, and said they would tie her hands. The girl decided that she would do it again then, but then her strength disappeared. Liffey didn't understand at all why she only succeeded once. Then Sir Millard called her. She was very happy when she saw him. The men said that if he came any closer, she would die. The Duke was also nearby and ordered them to take their hands off her. With the help of magic, he threw them aside and took Lady's hand, asking if she was okay. It felt like he'd taken off for a second, and she trusted that it was Castian who did it, and she was just beginning to think that she had done it again. His Highness also came with them. He looked worried and asked what was wrong with her, or rather, he wanted to know if she was hurt. Liffey said she was fine and not hurt at all. Millard noted that she had injured her arm. Princip was shocked and asked when she had gotten hurt. He said they needed to treat her, so he suggested they leave quickly. She also decided to thank them for saving her, because she survived thanks to them. The Duke was shocked and asked again, but Principal urged them to leave quickly. Then they bandaged her hand. First aid was provided, but she needed treatment upon arrival at the palace. The lady was grateful to the knight for his assistance. She thought there that because he was a knight, his bandaging skills were simply amazing. The lady noticed that the gentleman was still pale. He hadn't said a word. He must have been very frightened. She said that, basically, he needed to avoid the shoe. She was scared, so there was some information leakage. These people wanted her to know His Majesty's location. She needed to extend the time of the prediction. She did not have an exit agreement, so she suggested that he go on a trip for now. The emperor couldn't understand how she could be doing something incomprehensible in such a situation. Liffey said she had a sword pointed at her neck and didn't understand what else she was supposed to do. The prince believed that it was all because of him, because he constantly put her in danger. But the lady simply hugged him. The emperor began to ask what she was doing. Liffey said that she was actually scared, but she knew he would save her. She was his weakness, and she knew that he would come for her so that she could not tell them anything. Now the lady knew what children smelled like very nice. The emperor also hugged her, and the lady was very glad that everything worked out. The festival in the capital lasted for about 4 days, but everything ended without a hitch. After an investigation into her kidnapping, it was discovered that nobles were involved. But when soldiers arrived at their mansion, they were all unconscious. In any case, talking to them was impossible. The criminal was an ordinary aristocrat, and it was also known that he had hired mercenaries from a distant province. As soon as the knights learned of this, they immediately went to the mansion. But the entire family was found passed out in the dining room. When everyone woke up, they immediately rushed to the knights. They shouted that they were wrong, after which the family was sent to the palace prison. But all this time, they were unconscious. And when they woke up, they said that they were very guilty, and after that, they lost consciousness again. Hi! Decided that if they were unconscious in the dining room, they were in the living room, which meant they had seen the perpetrator in person. He also inquired about the family's surroundings. Millard reported that nothing unusual was going on. They had attended Castian's banquet, but otherwise nothing out of the ordinary. Perhaps someone was conspiring with the Viscount, and when things didn't go according to plan, the criminal wanted to make sure the Viscount kept his mouth shut. However, identifying the person behind all this will be very difficult. It's a difficult task. They went to the temple. The girl was shocked, because the emperor hadn't said a word during that time. The purpose of the visit is the baptism of the Peri. Baptism is an act of blessing for the imperial family. When a new member of the imperial family is born, they are taken to the temple for baptism. After this, when it started to rain, people began to say that the prince had the power of Simeon, and soon he received a letter asking him to come for baptism. They wanted to bless the prince. However, while preparing for the trip, she felt that Persilian was not himself, so she decided to ask Sir Millard about it. The knight noted that there was no conflict, but he was baptized late at the age of 19. He received a blessing. This happened after his return from the tower to the imperial palace, but compared to others, he was baptized very late. People are usually baptized at the age of 3 or 4. So was he really only baptized after he became an archmage? In fact, it will increase. They call the temple an incompetent group of people, and she did not even expect that the emperor would try to solve the problem diplomatically. The lady asked who the child was. The woman replied that he was a student priest, and that children from the provinces were admitted there every year. Liffey mentioned that they even have a full training course. She didn't know about that. There are temples in the provinces, but they say that the capital's is considered the best. And they say that in the capital there is a sanctuary that is protected by Simeon himself. So this place is considered more divine. The priests greeted the guests. They wished that God would hear all their problems and bless them. This religion has been considered the state religion for almost 1,000 years. Usually, the baptism of the imperial family is associated with a long and lavish ceremony, but the emperor refused all this and decided to be baptized quietly. The prince seemed to have accepted his arrival with humility, but they all knew who bore 999% of his anger. Even the library here is beautiful, and the air seems much cleaner. The lady noted that the temple is said to be blessed by God and has very pure energy. From this day on, she must also attend this temple. Write me a rather simple matter. First, you need to clear your mind and pray, and then receive a blessing from the high priest. The only problem was that the prayer had to be recited for an hour. No one except Sir Millard could enter the room with the emperor, as he needed to concentrate. She was very sorry she couldn't go with him, and it seems he didn't want to be baptized because of the prayer. This shelf contains books from a series. I think it contains all the information about the church. Simeon is a god symbolizing fire. This continent was originally desolate, a desert, although the land bordered the sea. This happened because of the divine beast Simeon, who was called Siccar, and he had the form of a red dragon. The first emperor, who was able to communicate with the beast, became its friend and family. It is said that the emperor was able to receive Simeon's blessing because he cared for the divine beast that initially devastated the earth. Thus arose the legend that the imperial family was blessed by Simeon himself. Born in the 21st century, she finds it hard to believe. But people here must believe it. Without it, no one would recognize a 4-year-old child. If she were the prince, she would have left the empire long ago. Liffey noted that she had said that Simeon was close to fire, so she asked how priests interacted with water. The lady said that the whole point is balance, and strong priests can control water. There were even cases when priests could purify water. They also say that they can heal people, and she also heard that some people believe that water can be summoned. Liffey was shocked. The lady said that if she liked the information about God so much, she could be baptized too. Liffey believed the lady was asking her to become a priest. But the woman explained that baptism wouldn't make her a priest. She would simply receive the faith. The lady asked what it was. To become a priest, one must pass an exam and undergo special training. And by the way, His Majesty's mother was a priest. Liffey was very surprised by this information. She thought that Persillion's mother died at an early age, and this is the first time she hears about her being a priest. She'd read that priests weren't allowed to marry. She's simply His Highness's guardian and needs to check with his grandmother to answer his questions. She knows little about it. She was originally a priest, but was later removed from their list. His Majesty's mother angered the church by meeting with the emperor and becoming pregnant. Therefore, they forbade even calling her by name, after which everyone found out that the emperor had an inappropriate relationship with a priest. That explains everything. The reason she and Persillion lived in a remote palace, and why he ate so little. It was all because the church was angry with her. The prince's christening was over. The lady announced that she would lead them on their way. Liffey believed that Persillion's mother had the same golden life as they had. She doesn't know all the details, but she feels like something fishy is going on here. With her wish, she can reach out to God. This letter is sent to the Shekinah sanctuary, and sometimes an answer may come. Thanks to these messages, the empire was able to end the First Continental War. They were to head east to greet the continent's first rays of sunshine. After this, the emperor decided to end the Continental War. He thus took the eastern part of the continent by surprise, after which he won a victory. And it is said that this was the most fertile time for the empire. The prince wondered if anyone else would see the letter. He was told that no one would. Once the letter reached Shaken, all the words in the letter would disappear, and then the paper itself. He took the matter surprisingly seriously and hid the paper from her so she wouldn't see anything. She thought it was very sweet and decided she would write too. She wrote that she wanted the wish of the person sitting next to her to come true. The girl thought the letter was excellent. She asked the gentleman why he was looking at her letter when he wasn't going to show her his. The emperor was indignant and said that he had not looked on purpose. He thought she wanted him to look, but that wasn't true. He asked for everything to go back. Liffey assumed he simply saw her wish. And so I decided to tell her my story, and she thought it was very sweet. Princip asked her to calm down. Only 2 were able to enter, so the lady asked the prince who he wanted to take with him. The center of this temple is considered sacred and can only be entered through one passage. The emperor said he would go with Liffey. The girl was very surprised. She felt as if she were a Pokemon who had been summoned, and she thought it would go with the knight. She sold it because it meant he would feel more comfortable with her. Legend has it that sacred ponds reflect a person's true colors. That is why it is also called a reservoir that reflects the truth. If they ask a question and water drips at that moment, it means the answer to that question is yes. The girl is sick, which seems to be a way for him to test her prophetic abilities. She thought that they had improved their relationship and did not understand why he did this to her. Beyond these doors lies the pool of truth. Liffey asked if she would go with them. The woman said yes, but she needed to show them in more detail how exactly they should ask questions. Liffey wanted to know if they could listen to the entire briefing beforehand and go in just the 2 of them. If only she and the emperor had gone, she could have gathered everyone and said that the water, for example, had run out, but that wouldn't work with a priest. She needed to do something, so he decided to tell her that, in fact, his being wanted to be alone. This was a crucial moment after all, and she wanted to tell him so he would feel comfortable. It's just that His Highness is still so small they will be embarrassed. So the woman understood them and decided that I should go with them. She consulted with someone and came to say that she hoped they would spend this time comfortably. The emperor knew she would do it. His mistress was surprised and asked if he had chosen her specifically so she would ask them to go alone. He confirmed this, so the lady immediately began to say that she immediately knew that he believed in her. Perry thought they wouldn't have been able to stand her anyway because she was too loud. That meant he believed her. She remarked that in this pond, it seemed one could actually see one's own image. As far as His Highness knows, this is just a legend, but it's better to check once. The emperor decided he was a fool and allowed it to be tested. The lady will approach, and it seems his adult form is there. In principle, he thought she was making fun of him, but she was offended that his face was saying something there. She also remembered how he took her hand. Then his face was the same as it had been then, and she remembered it exactly. The prince asked what he looked like. The girl said he was very handsome. The emperor believed that this was said about all people they saw for the first time. The lady tried to convince him it was true. Persilian asked her to forget and not understand why, only she could see it. She thought it was probably because he didn't believe in God 2 hours earlier. The lady was very happy because they had shown who was boss. When he touched the water, the lady was frightened. He asked what had happened to her there again. The girl said the handsome one had disappeared somewhere, so the emperor came to ask why she was so happy. Come to think of it, she likes him better in his cute form. The gentleman told her to watch her mouth. He wanted to know if he would return to his previous appearance within a week, 2 weeks, a month. 2 months or maybe 6 months. He got really angry and started kicking everything. The girl grabbed him. The boy said he was a fool for believing it. Liffey noted that she needed to wait a little longer for an answer. The emperor suggested that she try. The girl asked what question she could ask. Even philosophers do not know what the meaning of life is. How can someone like her ask anything incomprehensible? But he still said that she should do it immediately, so the lady agreed. She asked if she could become the greatest fortune teller on the continent. She can still become rich because she can simply sell real estate. It seemed it really wasn't working. The emperor couldn't understand how anyone could ask such a stupid question. Liffey asked what if he was busy now, and she wondered how God could answer the question in that case. There was no point in waiting for an answer. Then, at this, the prince laughed and said it was time for them to go. The lady didn't mind, and when he left, she asked if she could lift Persilian's curse. She made it sound like she would die because she couldn't lift the curse. Persilian is cute sometimes. She gets scared when he threatens her. I wish he did it less often lately. She linked that. He is very cute when he is little, and she thinks that His Majesty is not as bad as the rumors say about him. There still won't be any answers, but for her that's not so bad. The curse will definitely be lifted. The emperor asked what she was doing there. His mistress replied that she was already on her way. Perry asked why she was stuck there, and the lady just sighed and said that she heard something. The prince asked what it was, and was surprised because he had not heard anything, after which the girl said she was just imagining things. It must have been dew that had dripped into the pond. The news that Prince Perry had gone to the temple to be baptized spread very quickly. Everyone just said that he decided to get baptized quietly. He is very modest. The empire's future would be bright. They began to respect him for not being so rude, and of course for the rain. While he solidified his title as prince, she was being tested for courage. That's the very reason for it. Ghosts are wandering the yard. The book's genre has changed to horror. The maid said that every night they hear screams, and they also say that near that palace, you can sometimes see a burning silhouette. The maid was shocked that she knew nothing about this. All of His Majesty's brothers and sisters were dead. In this palace, Persilian burned all his brothers and sisters as soon as the emperor ascended the throne. This place was abandoned. And after that, no one said anything about that palace. But recently, everyone started hearing screams from there, and they say there's a video of a man walking through a fire. Some perfect story behind the signs. An abandoned castle, a murdered imperial family. They say that after His Majesty's arrival, ghosts began appearing one after another. Perhaps someone came up with this in order to get rid of the prince, and the rumors could harm him. The prince decided to blow up the palace. Liffey was completely shocked and couldn't understand how he'd come to that conclusion. No one lives in this palace anyway, and after these rumors, No one will object. Liffey asked if he really wanted to confirm the rumors. After all, he needed to refute them. Persilian believed it had to be blown up anyway. He needed to find out how much supply they had for it. It seemed he'd simply found a good excuse to get rid of the palace. He decided that if he met ghosts there, then he would be able to kill them again. They were already dead anyway. The girl thought it was just some kind of nightmare. Finally, after thinking about it, it was decided that they would go and look around, and the emperor asked her why she had become so quiet. If she makes noise, she'll be the first to be killed. The person who screams that they have to get out of here is always the first to die. Millard thought she was cold, but the lady told him to ignore her and just cuddle up to Emma. This made him uncomfortable. The lady asked him not to rush to enlarge and to go with them. Liffey didn't understand why he suddenly did this, and how he could move so quickly with such short legs. This palace looks like a place in every horror movie. Sir told her to calm down. Then someone dies. Their existence is erased from this earth. Liffey agreed with this. It seems he is talking about his mother now. She didn't know what to say to that, so she decided to remain silent. The gentleman asked if she sensed any negative energy. Liffey noticed that she felt some kind of dark energy. The knight said it didn't seem human. The emperor actually agreed with him that there really was something there. The girl, however, was very frightened. She saw that there was a fire in that direction and was very scared. Perry, well, that means the ghost exists. He ordered the knight to catch it. Liffey was terrified and completely at a loss as to how to capture a ghost. She begged the creature to wait as they had to go there together. A knight jumped out from around the corner and asked who he was, but all they saw before them was fire. Liffey was very frightened and told His Highness that she was very scared. She asked His Majesty to be more careful, but she fell because he threw her away from him. He walked straight into the fire, but she screamed at him not to. Perry told her to be calm. She did say he needed to be quiet to stay alive. She agreed, but now there was fire behind him. Perry from the past. What's there? The knight was simply horrified and asked what was wrong with his hand because he thought it was hot. The princess said absolutely not, but it needed to be gotten rid of. Liffey said that if she wasn't hotter, she could stay. This way, he could acquire a new image, an angelic child. But he repeated once again that he had come and that he needed to be removed. Actually, he might be useful. The knight was shocked because it was too hot for him. It seemed only His Majesty could touch fire. The girl immediately approached him and asked if his hand was okay. Liffey offered him water. She took it in case she had to pour holy water on a ghost. Liffey started to be consumed by the fire, so she became very scared and started screaming. After this, the fire rose into the air and began to fly against the wind, which was completely incomprehensible to them. Liffey wanted to know what was there. The prince said that the sacred tree of their empire grew there. Persilian considered this a bad sign, so he needed to return. Ultimately, the ghost story ended, and only one mystery remained. Victory went to the prince, as expected of him. After the prince visited this place, the ghosts no longer appeared. And now the prince is loved even more. To find out something about the fireball, the prince searched for all possible information about magic and literature. Liffey went to the palace's vast library to find some information as well. She asked what the empire's sacred tree was. The lady replied that it was the tree that had grown in the palace since the empire's founding. Legend has it that the tree was donated by the boxer himself. The tree is always associated with religion. Liffey was shocked by how old it was. The books don't say much about the tree. The tree produces a transparent floor, and inside it is a powerful magical stone. This fruit is said to contain a panacea. The amount of fruit produced varies each year, but people consider the imperial family holy because they always manage to harvest the most fruit. On average, he manages to collect about 10 of them. The lady was simply delighted and asked how many His Majesty usually collects. The woman replied that the current emperor hadn't collected any yet. Another reason people call him a tyrant. In reality, there's no difference between emperors and others. That's just how the people of the empire think. She also added that the tree's leaves also have healing properties, and nobles often hunt for these leaves. The lady began to ask if there were many of these leaves. The woman had never seen one, but she thought so. Liffey asked why she suddenly became so serious. Usually, when a new emperor ascends to the throne, there is a tradition of giving these leaves to the nobles who support the government. However, His Majesty did not ascend to the throne in a completely traditional way. However, some nobles sided with him and asked to give them leaves. But the emperor did not understand why he should bless them. He said this, then took the leaves, and left leaves are given not only to nobles. Once a year they are sent to each medical institution. For this custom, nobles are singled out first, because the leaves are issued to them first, and then to everyone else. And then only on the day of the empire's anniversary, a tyrant emperor, who uses a healing potion to hide the blood on his hands, someone then created a bad impression of the emperor by spreading all sorts of rumors. Perry wondered how she knew it was the nobles who were spreading these rumors. She speaks of a marquise's family, so she wonders who could have told her such a thing. The woman noted that not all nobles share the same opinion, and Cyril told her about it. Liffey noted that she thought this was the woman who often helped the emperor. She confirmed this, and noted that there was a time when her older brother and Cyril had been looking for information about this. Liffey thought they were just romantically involved, but they actually got along very well. The lady didn't understand why the missus was crying. She asked if there was any jealousy. Cyril was close to His Majesty. The woman believed she seemed to have seen this in her prophecies. According to her older brother, it was a relationship in which there was simply no room for jealousy, but he did not tell her the details. The princess's potential soulmate wasn't jealous at all, so she was curious about how close she was to the emperor. It's so cool, even though the marquise described the duke as a kind and gentle person, she couldn't even imagine that this man was not jealous. The lady remembers him saying that such was a princess's job, and she was always pleased that her brother loved such a wonderful man. Elaine also likes Cyril. Liffey was certain the princess would return with good news. Elaine believed she had seen a prophecy. Let this be a prediction backed by faith. 4 days later, the prince announced that they needed to go to the magic tower. Liffey told him not to worry, because the tower would let him in. If he went, his questions would reach the Grand Duke. The lady asked what would happen if he came and said that he wanted to learn magic. With a body like this, which hasn't yet developed magical abilities, he can't do that. We'll come in the morning, and he might say he's looking for traces of his father. The guy said that he would never say this, so the lady thought about it what to do then. Miss was informed that the Duke was looking for her, and the lady was very surprised when she heard this. She realized that this was what she needed, because he would have a magical passage into the tower. Liffey turned to His Highness and asked him to trust her. She was so happy to see him that she greeted him with a smile. The Duke was very surprised. He asked if she was talking about him. The lady raised her eyebrows specifically that it was him. She had a place she wanted to go with him. Castian was surprised that she was waiting for him. The lady remarked that she would never enter there without him. The gentleman came closer and asked what this place was. Liffey said it was a place full of dreams and hope, where at night you could see many stars. And during the day, you can see many colorful lights there, and it is a magical tower. She seemed to have often seen this expression on the emperor's face. The girl remarked that she would be very grateful if he would go with her to this tower. Castian said that the doors will always be open for her. In fact, His Highness wants to go to the tower. It's just what the people of the empire think. The gentleman noted that, by the way, he had also been there recently, although perhaps he shouldn't show up there. But the girl did not understand why. She assumed that he had stayed in the tower for a year, and then ran away here, saying that such a place was not suitable for him, and that the tower had undermined his pride. It seems he was hurt during the festival. He wanted to visit the nobles who were involved in her kidnapping, but they were not home. The lady thought this could be sorted out later, and that someone else was behind it. He wondered who it could be, because he too would like to help. The girl said that when they went to Vic's house, the mansion was very clean, and there were no signs that someone had broken into their house, and she thinks that the real criminal did something to them. The gentleman turned to the lady and said that she would never experience anything like this again, and that he would take a lot of soldiers and find the criminal. Therefore, he asks her not to worry, because the Hadar family will definitely sort this out. The girl did not understand why they had to hire an entire army of soldiers for this, and why was the prince looking at them like that? When he noticed her looking at him, he closed the curtains. She doesn't understand what's wrong with him, and he thought she couldn't handle the task. Liffey asked if he could help her. The gentleman would be glad to do so. In truth, His Highness really wants to get into the magic tower, and she will be very upset if she cannot fulfill his dream. The Duke said that he would not mind taking His Highness with him, so the girl was immediately very happy. She was so happy he had business tomorrow and would be free after that, so he figured that would suit her. Liffey suggested they go the day after tomorrow. She couldn't understand why he was suddenly in such a bad mood. He said he'd be ready to leave tomorrow. The Duke's smile seemed to take on a bitter edge, and she hoped it wasn't because of her role. She decided to change clothes, because this way no one would be able to recognize them. She would behave sullenly. The Emperor asked if she really wanted to meet him like this, since she was smiling from ear to ear. It's really interesting to work undercover, and besides, they're wearing matching clothes again. Today's concept is that she is Castian's assistant, who has a younger brother, who wanted to be left alone, so they all came together. The Emperor was surprised that she liked something like that so much. The girl said she was wondering how it would be to dress in pairs more often. The Emperor decided to let the topic drop. The Duke greeted the Emperor, or rather the Prince and Lady. Liffey noticed that he looked unwell, or rather very tired. He was simply getting ready for the trip. The Lady and His Highness trusted him to guide them to the tower, and he had to prepare for it perfectly. Even though he's smiling, she still feels this tiredness, so it's interesting what exactly he was preparing for. The prince was very grateful for this, but the Duke said it was an honor for him. To get into the tower, they must pass through the gates. Liffey was absolutely thrilled when she saw the gate. "It's so close to me, it's just incredible." The Duke held her close and asked her to be careful, because they had to be careful when crossing the gate. All of this could suck them into space. That's why he did it. Liffey said she understood the Emperor wasn't exactly keen on watching. When Liffey noticed this, he immediately turned away. She wondered what had happened to him again. He did the same thing last time, so maybe she did something wrong. Liffey was absolutely delighted when she saw this tower. She asked if it was really her. The Duke said that here she could learn magic, and then she would have a choice. You can stay in the tower or leave it to continue improving, but the basic course of study is approximately 8 years. She was shocked, because after such a long training, someone still remains and continues to study in the tower. It reminds her of something. Otherwise, there's the smell of coffee all around the dark circles that reach all the way to the chin and that worn-out, haggard look. It's like being a student, Liffey knows that feeling all too well. They were greeted. It was a great honor for them to meet the Duke. She sorted through all the documents, all the lists. When she wanted to tell him about the amount he asked her to wait, he himself said, or these, that he needed to check something, so he asked her to wait for him. Perhaps the magicians don't like the fact that they have arrived and can watch them. Perhaps it would be better to take a look around here at this time. It's very beautiful. But the prince told her to stand still. The girl wanted to know if they all really fly on a broomstick and catch a ball.